Good morning. It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As you may know by now, I am what is technically known as a soppy git. And so I'm going to begin today's programme by reading a text which has just tickled me and touched me, not a little. From Stephen in Milton Keynes. He says, "Good morning, James. It is with genuine sadness that I have to say goodbye for a while. After 14 years, I'm changing jobs, which means for the first few months I can no longer listen to you live. I'm going to really miss your dulcet tones and great opinions. Please take care and keep it real. You're always there for me, like a great mate." That was the line that got me. I love you, man. See you in a few months. I love you too, man. And I will indeed see you in a few months. But don't forget, you can download the whole show podcast at Global Player. So I will be able to keep you company, albeit at a slightly different time of day. I won't make a habit of that, and hopefully people won't make a habit of not being able to listen anymore. But as I say, I am what is technically known as a soppy git, and that one got me right in the feels this morning after I sprinted to the studio at a speed not reached by me since about 1988. I think on one occasion I've been so daydreamy in the newsroom that I have missed the beginning of my talk up with towards the end of Nick's show. I came closer this morning than I've come in a very, very long time. So if I sound a tiny bit out of breath, I'm not sure that I do, then that would be why. Anyway, I can't let it go. He wouldn't let it lie, as Vic Reeves used to say. I can't let it go. I am baffled. Now, it might be because I spend so long with the face pressed up to this particular windscreen, this particular window. I have covered this from pretty much every angle under the sun, and for a whole bunch of reasons that the record will attest. I haven't historically enjoyed conversations about immigration, as I explained to you yesterday, because I wish that it wasn't such a toxic subject. And yesterday I cautiously suggested to you that it is detoxified. At this point in the cycle, and it may well prove to be a cycle, at this point in the cycle, truly huge numbers coming from all manner of countries, but no longer European countries, truly huge numbers have not prompted anything like the response you could have bet your house on 7 years ago, and possibly 4 years ago. You could have bet your house on it. Imagine what the front page would have been in 2015 if immigration figures had hit an all-time high. Well, you don't have to imagine what the front page would be, because you had front page after front page after front page raging, wailing and gnashing teeth over figures that were considerably lower than they are now. Figures that are considerably lower would prompt much more fury and outrage. And I genuinely don't understand why. So I didn't know yesterday. I told you that it was a speculation. I was going out on a bit of a limb on this one. But I didn't think that the right-wing newspapers, who have, I think we can all agree, over the last few years, we've kind of seen a truly disgusting descent into the sewers and gutters of xenophobia and racism by these papers. You know we have, and not just the tabloids, but also, I mean, I know technically only the Telegraph is not a tabloid these days, but you know what I mean by the word. The Telegraph is arguably the worst now. It publishes absolute filth routinely on its comment pages. In fact, it's the only one of the right-wing newspapers that has a comment piece flagged across its front page. The Tories' dirty secret. They don't want to cut immigration. That's by one of Andrew Neil's house elves called Fraser Nelson. The other papers, the papers you'd expect to go big on this, what's the most obvious is the Mail. The Daily Mail has not gone anywhere near. I mean, it covers it in detail inside with all of the usual kind of pearl clutching and disapproval. But the front page is where you put the thing that matters most. And the front page of the Daily Mail is encouraging you to hate eco-protesters, not foreigners. Now, pause for a minute to reflect on that. If I'd said to you 6 or 7 years ago that on the day that the day after the biggest immigration figures, the highest immigration figures in living memory had been published, the Daily Mail would not be encouraging you to hate immigrants on its front page. It has a little go at it inside, but on its front page, it's encouraging you to hate environmental protesters. The Telegraph goes with mortgage rates, not with immigration. Immigration gets a little nib right at the bottom, encouraging you to turn to page 4. The record levels of migration. A little line about Rishi Sunak saying they're too high. The Daily Express, which occasionally makes the Daily Mail look like Plato's Symposium, somehow manages to turn it into a Rishi Sunak fan letter. In an unequivocal message to Daily Express readers, Rishi Sunak has declared we must and will cut the number of people moving to the UK. Now, there perhaps is the first clue as to what is happening here. The Tories have been in charge for 13 years. I am supremely comfortable with immigration. I think it is absolutely necessary to growth, and I don't buy 99% of the reasons that are offered up as to why it is a bad thing. Almost all of those reasons, when you dig down into them, just look like xenophobia, a fear of foreigners to be charitable, or base racism to be less charitable. It is not a subject that I have handled perfectly over the years on the radio, because I'm always conscious of trying to pretend, or not pretend, hoping is the word I want, hoping that some people have what you would call legitimate concerns. Some people's objections are genuine. They're not. So if you can literally prove that your wages are considerably lower as a consequence of immigration levels, then I have to have sympathy for you. I also have to point out that in order for your wages to go higher, whatever it is that you do will involve the prices going up for everybody else, smack in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So even there, it's never simple. It's never black and white. But the Daily Mail does not today, on the morning after the highest ever record level immigration figures have been published, the Daily Mail is not using its front page to scream at you. And nor, perhaps even more remarkably, is The Sun. The Sun instead has got a story about refugees or potential asylum seekers apparently asking for UK assistance instead of French when they were. So that's 50 people. So the day that we find out the government's presiding over net immigration of 606,000, the Sun is actually encouraging you to get cross with 50 refugees. Perhaps there's an answer in there somewhere. I am baffled. And I am allowing myself today, which I wouldn't do yesterday, or I did do yesterday, but even more cautiously, I'm going to be less cautious today about my optimism. Because imagine what we would be. Well, we'd still be in the European Union, I suppose, most obviously, so you don't have to imagine that. You know what that was like. Imagine what this country would be like if we were focusing our attention on real problems instead of being encouraged by right-wing media to dedicate huge portions of our mental energy and our lives to worrying about immigration. See, that's why I keep telling you I don't like doing it as a subject, even though I'm doing it as a subject. I don't like doing it as a subject because even if you do it from my angle, which is, of course, to point out facts to people and to question prejudices and to call out the appalling racist rhetoric of right-wing columnists and commentators. Even if you do it from my angle, you're adding to the fact that it takes up too much of our collective bandwidth. If we'd spent perhaps as much time thinking about the economy or economic growth as we have about immigration, or how about inequality? If we'd spent as much time looking at the widening gap between the people at the top of our financial pyramid and the people at the bottom, if you'd looked at the cost of living crisis from the perspective of years ago, moving in on food production, looking at vacancies in the NHS, if we talked about these things as problems that needed to be solved rather than constantly looking at them through the lens of very carefully cultivated immigration obsession, then the country would be in a much, much healthier place than it is today. And don't forget what we have done together for years. We have taken those calls from people who are... I mean, I remember the very first one. I changed the way I work in response to one caller. Must be 15 years ago now, maybe a bit less. John in Hounslow. I remember him clearly ringing up to say, you're not allowed to say what you want in this country anymore without being called a racist. So I told him to say it. I said, go on, tell me what it is that you can't say. And he said, all right, I live in Hounslow. And he said it's full of Pakistanis. And I paused, I gulped, because I'd sort of gone out on a bit of a limb by inviting him to say whatever it was he wanted to say on the radio. But obviously the immediate question to ask someone like that who insists he's not a racist is, what is wrong with a high proportion of people who you believe to be of Pakistani origin living in our part of London? I living in Hounslow myself at the time. And he replied, after a pause, they smell, which I did wonder whether I'd gone down a bit of a mad avenue by inviting him to share his comments on air. And so I, of course, then said, what do they smell of? To which he responded, curry, James. There's another pause. There's a voice in my head going, what the hell have you done now? How are you going to get out of this? Can you go to the adverts early? Thankfully, the right question popped into my head, which was this. Do you like curry, James? Do you like curry, John? There's another pause. Yes, James. And I've been taking those calls ever since, but obviously from the different angle, not asking people what do you think about immigration and leaving it at that, but asking them where those thoughts and opinions came from. And they either came from, if they were negative, they either came from a very dark place or from ignorance. And that's why I'm cautiously optimistic today. But the racism must still be there. It's just not being stoked by the usual suspects in the way that it feels often it has been stoked for all of my adult life, certainly for all of the years that I've been doing this job. I read yesterday the litany of front pages turning you against everybody from Polish people to Pakistani people. And today the numbers are off the charts. They are the highest ever. And the right-wing media is not going bananas. And I just want you to tell me why you think that is. There'll be some obvious answers. There might be some less obvious answers. That's the crucial question for me. You may not agree. Respectfully, I'd say that's because you just don't realise the extent of the problem and the depth of the manipulation. But when the right-wing media decided to demonise immigrants, decided to demonise immigration, it created a toxic tidal wave that washed over this country and did immeasurable damage on a daily basis, not just institutionally and nationally, but also individually, affecting families, making people feel as if they didn't belong or weren't welcome. It led inevitably and inexorably to the referendum vote in 2016. All of this, whether deliberately or not, all of this media coverage created a febrile atmosphere of division and unpleasantness, and lots of people loved it. Lots of people profited from it. Lots of people made a killing off the back of it, either financially or just in terms of fame and infamy. You could list them now, couldn't you? The people who are only known, you only know their names because they have been complaining about immigration for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's not just Farage, there's loads of them. Pretty much everyone who's ever written a column for the Daily Mail, you only know their names because they've been complaining about immigration for all of their careers. But the complaints today are muted. Muted. And all I want from you today is the why of it. Why do you think the right-wing media, who have turned racism into an art form in recent years, have gone quiet about immigration at precisely the point immigration has turned into all of the things they told us it would be when they were telling us to be terrified, furious and scared? Why? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Quick shout to Ash, who says, I just got huge deja vu, James. I was listening to you read that chapter from your audiobook last night about John in Hounslow. I don't think I could do the pauses quite as long on the audiobook as I could here, but it stays with me. It was the first time after starting this job that I realised you have to ask people why they think something, not what. I'm pretty sure I wasn't the first phone-in host in history to come up with that, but it changed my life. It changed my job. Why do you think? Not what do you think, but why do you think it? I want to get rid of all the laws. Okay, next caller. No, what law do you want to get rid of? Why do you think that? What is it that you base that position on? And as soon as you do that, everything changes, on air and off air. But I don't get this. I don't get this. I got it a little bit wrong yesterday. I was a little ambitious in trying to get people who were furious about immigration but no longer are to ring in. You're still more than welcome, but you can't base your position on a dismissal of the figures or saying that you don't really believe them or they don't reflect the real picture. We have to talk about the statistics that are in front of us, with Mark Twain's words ringing in our collective memory. Was it Mark Twain who said lies, damned lies and statistics? Probably. Why? The newspapers that have been telling you and me for the best part of a decade that immigrants are ruining our country have gone quiet about immigration at precisely the point it reaches record levels. Tell me how that's happened. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. The phone lines are open. I can't wait to talk to you today. I'm in a very sociable mood. 21 minutes after 10. It's good to see that you share a degree of my befuddlement, but it's even better to see that you've got more answers to this question than I have managed to assemble. Why, in the wake of record immigration figures, are the newspapers and presumably broadcasters, although it's harder to keep track of that, obviously, who have spent years telling you to be terrified of immigrants, that your life is being ruined by immigration, why are they responding to the record levels published yesterday in a much less excitable fashion than they responded for years to much lower levels? Answers on a postcard, please. Andrew's in Acton. Andrew, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I think that the way this started was that people like Cummings realised the only way to win the Brexit referendum was by playing the immigration card, which they did very effectively, especially through Facebook and so forth. But more sophisticated people on the sort of, say, the rightish wing of the political spectrum actually realised that immigration is economically an extremely valuable thing. And trashing immigration will be economically very bad for this country. So they are suddenly pivoting, if you like. It's a massive pivot on immigration. They're almost trying to say, you know what the latest Brexit benefit is that we can control our own immigration and have more immigration.
That's not cognitive dissonance, is it? You could realistically say that we have different controls in place from what we had under freedom of movement, and the numbers are higher. The only fly in the ointment of your analysis is the fact that the Tory government keeps insisting that they want the numbers to be lower.
Well, they're on a bit of a Morton's fork here because they've still got to try and win the next election, and they think that there's large numbers of people out there who will be attracted for them if they sound tough on immigration.
But that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because that's what sells newspapers as well, Andrew. So if that number of people is large enough to win an election, then it's also large enough to keep circulation bubbling along, which brings us back to the mystery of why, even if you like the puppet masters of commerce and right-wing business interests are supremely comfortable with immigration levels and just indulged in the scaremongering to get Brexit over the line, which is a little bit conspiracy theory, but we'll run with it. Why are the newspapers not joining in with the Tories, chasing the same people who you think might deliver an election, or you think the Tories think might deliver an election win to them, by insisting we want to bring it down, we want to bring it down?
Well, it could be that this is their way of trying to kind of, rather than break the news hard, break the news soft and talk up, because they do seem to be talking up the economic benefits. And I mean, in one sense, it's music to my ears because it's been incredibly difficult to try and get people to conduct the discussion on immigration on the basis that immigration is something good rather than something bad.
It's very hard to find anyone. Sadiq Khan did it yesterday, but most of the Labour front bench, or all of the Labour front bench, won't do it. They try and have their cake and eat it, don't they? But they're still all talking about bringing numbers down.
They do, and you could get to the extraordinary position that you've got the Labour Party tougher on and sounding more anti-immigrant than the Conservative Party.
Yes.
I mean, actually, for me, this is the only way the Conservative Party can come back into the fold, to kind of, in a sense,
to tack to the left,
the error of its ways. Well, not so much to the left, but to actually tack towards freedom of movement.
Yes.
And freedom of movement is the thing which helped this country so much, and lack of which has been a major problem, except it's been ameliorated by the fact that we've had higher immigration from various other countries.
Of course.
And they're trying to kind of make sense of this. Well, the only way to make sense of it for me is to act on the footing that immigration is a good thing.
Yes, and that is absent, actually, from the political spectrum at the moment. I presume the Liberal Democrats are pursuing the position you describe. I'm afraid, to my shame, off the top of my head, I can't say for certain that they are, but I agree that Labour's positioning is very, very depressing. And at some point, doing what you need to do to get into power will cease to be an excuse because you will be in power and people will be watching hawk-like to see what you do. You have to hope that Sadiq Khan is something of a canary down the coal mine on what senior Labour politicians think, but they're still operating on the premise that you need to talk tough on immigration to get elected. And the Tories are operating on the premise that you need to talk tough on immigration to get elected. And the idea that you need to talk tough on immigration in order to get elected is almost certainly cross-fertilised from right-wing media. And that brings us back to the mystery, which I don't think you've answered, Andrew. You've given us some perfect context, some lovely context, but why the newspapers, who don't really care about the bigger picture, they put bums on seats? Is there a calculation here that it doesn't sell papers anymore to go nuts about immigration, or are they simply prioritising? We can't go nuts about immigration because the Tories have been in for 13 years and we keep telling our readers how brilliant they are. So it's still there. The tactic is still there. The bile ducts are just backing up, if you like. There's a blockage in the bile duct and they can't release the bile because it would hit the Tories. I don't know, just thinking out loud, but a slightly more sophisticated analysis from Andrew than I've managed to provide so far. Thank you for that. Sean's in Sheffield. Sean, what's actually going on?
Morning, James.
Hello,
I'm hoping I'm not going to be less articulate than your previous caller.
No, you won't. Don't worry.
Essentially,
Yeah.
my thoughts on this are, especially with the right-wing media at the minute, they championed Brexit so hard.
Yeah.
So hard. I mean, they sold. That was the one of the best advertising campaigns ever.
It was phenomenal, wasn't it?
It was ridiculously good.
They could have sold ice to the Eskimos, Sean.
They could have sold coal to Newcastle.
All of
but,
it.
Essentially, I think now, because we've seen these figures, we know that everything that they promised regarding immigration and everything that the Tory government has been promising, reducing the numbers, well, it's not happening. So for the right-wing press now, they're stuck because if they now start spouting about the numbers, then they're almost admitting that the Brexit that they championed so hard was actually a pup. It was actually a curate's egg. And it's failed.
It wasn't even a curate's egg. A curate's egg is good in parts. I don't know what parts of Brexit you think is good.
Yeah, exactly. There weren't any good parts. But so it just strikes me that that's the position, is they're terrified because they know if they now champion Brexit as being a failure, that's going to take away votes from the Conservatives, because a lot of people that voted Conservative were all about the Brexit and all about the successes of Brexit, which haven't.
How interesting then. So if I think we could probably all agree that if you're looking for an indication of the direction of racist traffic, then Nigel Farage is quite a good place to look. And he's gone early on calling it a failure. I know there's that little subtext of there is a good Brexit, but it goes to a different school. But there it is.
Fantastic analysis.
The newspapers are not ready yet to call it a failure, which means that they can't go to town on the immigration figures that they promised their readers would come down in the event of them voting for Brexit.
What I do think, James, is that I also think that, in a sense, I think that there's especially a lot from the right wing, I think in terms of shifting people that weren't perhaps against immigration. I think that they feel that they've not won the war.
They're the people. Yeah, they're the people I was trying to reach and failing to reach yesterday. Because I suppose people won't want to admit it to themselves, let alone to some gob on the radio. I fell for it, James, and now I realise. So I'll tell you the calls I remember, Sean. The ones I really remember were from people whose mother-in-law, for example, had voted to get rid of the immigrants, to reduce the number of immigrants. And my callers would say to their mother-in-law, "But I'm an immigrant. I'm Polish. I'm from Spain." And the mother-in-law would say, "Oh no, I didn't mean you.
Yeah,
I didn't mean you." So maybe the referendum result has removed the mythical migrant from the table. The ones in Farage's posters, the ones that were demonised and inflated to cause fear, the 70 million Turks that were going to move here. The mythical migrants have moved, and that leaves people with much, much less to get angry about, because they're just left with their lived experience, which is their daughter-in-law and their neighbour and their children's school friends.
Exactly, James. I think that's so do I. I hope that people's eyes are open, and I hope that the veil has dropped a little bit. I do think that I've seen a couple of things that have upset me a little bit on Twitter.
Go on.
Specifically, an article by Ian Duncan Smith regarding people who are in or long-term sick or disabled.
Yeah, that's next.
Getting them back to work. Exactly. And you're quite right. These things do go in cycles.
Yeah.
And, you know, first it's the immigrants, then we're going to target the disabled, then we're going to target the single mothers, then we're going to target the unions.
Yeah, you're right. And it's eco-protesters.
Coming round again.
The new ones are the eco-protesters who are, ironically enough, or conveniently enough, to prove Sean's point and mine, it's eco-protesters on the front page. They say, you must get cross. So all the people who've spent their lives telling you to get cross about immigrants are today telling you to get cross about eco-protesters. I suppose the $64,000 question is, are you going to fall for it again this time? Thomas Watt, thank you, Sean. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It is 10:36 and you are listening to LBC, where, I mean, Lynn puts it very neatly, very pithily in a tweet to @Mr. James O.B. She says, under freedom of movement, net migration was about 200,000 and we had no skill shortages. Now we, quotes, control, end quotes, our borders, apparently, and can choose who we want to come here. Net migration is 600,000 and there are skill shortages everywhere. It's almost like freedom of movement was a jolly good thing for the UK. I mean, maybe that's a large part of the answer. The problem is that, and to the question of why the right-wing media are not having the expected or traditional fit of the vapours at record levels of immigration, because even if you take out the anomalous arrivals of Ukrainian refugees and Hong Kong refugees, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but visa holders, Hong Kong visa holders, you're still left with double what we were looking at before Brexit, before the abolition of our freedom of movement and, of course, the abolition of the welcome that we provided for our fellow European Union member citizens. So even there, it's still around double, more, or around double, say, for the sake of argument, what it was. But to use that as an answer to the question of why the right-wing media isn't going bananas presumes that there's any sort of intellectual or moral consistency to their editorial decisions, and there obviously isn't. You know, the Telegraph is talking about the woke blob all the time, just weeks after it was telling you that Liz Truss's budget was the finest budget of their lifetimes. I mean, incredible to see the reverse ferrets going on. The front page of the Daily Mail, whether it's the steal of the new Iron Lady with a cartoon of Theresa May there, or whether it is finally a true Tory budget in response to the one that cost the country £30 billion when Liz Truss was in charge. And then, you know, a week later, and the parties, of course, putting it on the front page as a damp squib. The Sue Gray report is a damp squib. And then a month later, she's a vicious, biased, partisan Labour activist because she's going to go and work. So what was it then? Was it a damp squib, that report? Or was it the work of a vicious, biased, partisan activist? Because it certainly can't be both. So in terms of the logic of it, there is no consistency. So why aren't they going bonkers about the immigration figures? I still don't know. Except perhaps the most compelling answer so far is it would involve them attacking the Tories. And, you know, if there's anything that they're more frightened of than foreigners, it's a Labour government promising to clamp down on non-doms, a disproportionate amount of whom are represented in the corridors of newspaper owners. 10:38 is the time. Rick's in Lincoln. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
The thing is, I think that why the media isn't going full bore on immigration also ties up with my theory. Thank you. With my theory of the Brexit realisation, which is basically two famous quotes. One being, "You can fool some of the people some of the time,
yes,
but not all of the people all of the time." And there's no fool like an old fool.
I feel you're about to break into song, Rick.
Well, I may do, given half a chance. Now, the thing is that papers need to keep their readers on the boil. They exist and work on scaring people, keeping fear, worrying about people. That's what sells papers. Now, a lot of people have got wise to the immigration thing because they've seen the so-called benefits of Brexit not appearing, and they've gone, well, maybe this isn't a problem. And the newspapers know that people aren't that daft, that they can't really hammer this, because if they did hammer this, everyone would go, well, this is nonsense. We caught you out last time. We'll stop buying these. They are treating the general public like the proverbial frog in the frying pan and just keeping them simmering.
And you are treating them with more respect than any Daily Mail editor ever has, and thinking that they would see through a new attempt to whip up immigration rhetoric, which perhaps also explains the shift in focus to the comparatively negligible numbers on small boats, the massive majority of whom, of course, turn out to be genuine asylum seekers, genuine refugees. So, and that's failing. So now they've gone after the partners of PhD students. So there's just a sort of a narrowing of the oh, no, we didn't mean those foreigners. And then you narrow it down. No, we didn't mean those foreigners. We didn't mean those foreigners. And so what you're left with now in Suella Braverman's warped universe is the partners of PhD students who want to come here. They're the ones we've got to keep out now.
Well, yeah, but it's all about stretching the boundaries. I think what they're actually trying to do is to divert you by getting excited about protesters at the Chelsea Flower Show and things like that. Now, the reality is, are all of these things a problem? Yes. Is there a reason these people are protesting like they are? Yes, because nobody's listening. Yes, you only have to look at the whole insulate Britain. I mean, the reality was that when they were saying we should insulate Britain, if we'd done that, it'd be a great idea.
Would have been a lot better place to cope with the energy cost crisis. Have you noticed that the people that sold us Brexit and therefore did untold damage to the country are the same people who are telling us to hate the environmental protesters who are trying to stop untold damage being done to the planet or the species?
Yes, I had. But I'm
exactly
I'm
the same
like
people.
Yourself, really.
Exactly.
I'm honest.
No, fair enough. So there's one piece of the jigsaw missing, which I think you might have provided, and your contention, which I don't necessarily agree with, is that the average Daily Mail reader wouldn't buy it. It's still in the paper, Rick. So we can't go all in on this. It's still in the paper with the fancy graphics and all of that malarkey, but it's not on the front page. So they're still buying it, but the queues aren't quite as long as they used to be. That's
like you say. Maybe I'm being far too generous to their readers.
Yes, or too optimistic about the country that we live in. But that is, of course, the plight of the patriot through the plight of the patriot, the true patriot, as opposed to the one who defines patriotism as hating foreigners. The true patriot always wants the best for his country, and an absolute dialing down of racist rhetoric with regard to immigration and refugees would be wonderful for this country, not least because everyone would be able to focus on how awful the government is in every other field that it is responsible for. Rick, thank you. Back to Sheffield. James is there. James, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good to speak to you, mate.
Likewise.
Right, everybody who's contributed so far, I totally agree with most of the arguments, but I think everyone's just looking a little bit too deep and nuanced.
Possibly.
I really think it's as simple as this. Because Keir Starmer has chosen the route he's gone for in opposition, in terms of saying, quite right, yeah, too much immigration, we do need to get that down. It's set off absolute alarm bells in the right-wing media and the Tory party. It's like, hang on a minute, we've based our battle lines on this.
He's shot their fox.
Hang on, what the hell can we hear you with now?
Well, he tried. He tried on Wednesday. Sunak accused Starmer of being in favour of open borders, which he's not, and wanting to bring back freedom of movement, which he doesn't, although he said he did when he was campaigning to be leader of the Labour Party.
Exactly. And this is the thing, you see, because he's took the stance for the L, and actually I think he's playing a very, very clever chess game, to be honest. And the same thing with Brexit.
Well, I hope so, mate. I mean, as I say, if you're going to bend over backwards to get power, then people are going to be watching you very, very closely once you do actually achieve power. But I think it was Harold Wilson who said 1 day in power is worth 1,000 days in opposition. And it's very refreshing to have a Labour leader who understands that simple equation. But a lot of people worried about how far he is bending.
It is, and I'm somebody who voted for Jeremy Corbyn and liked a lot of what he had to say. And I used to, for example, on Facebook, follow a lot of left-wing Labour. They berate Starmer something terrible. He's the new Tony Blair. He's the demigod. No.
They'll never forgive him if he wins, will they?
No, and I try and nice and gently point out, listen, I agree with you. I was a big fan of Jeremy. However, doesn't help when you can't get into power.
That's such an obvious point to make. No, I know, yeah. But you make it till you're blue in the face, mate. You won't touch the sides of some of these sort of people who. It's a bit like Brexit, except that, of course, with Brexit, they got what they wanted, and it all fell apart in their hands. I suppose if you're still subscribing to the idea that Labour could have won in 2019, then you've always got that counterfactual. If only that hadn't happened and that hadn't happened, we would have won and we'd all be living in a New Jerusalem by now. You might just be right. They've got nowhere to go with it. Who would be? Because it's not just the. You've got to look at who the scapegoat is moving you towards. So the scapegoat, even though we had Tory governments, the scapegoat was the migrant, but the target was the European Union, or at least membership of the European Union. So that mythical argument that we couldn't control our borders, when of course we could have had a lot more control in place if we wanted to, we just chose not to, because not unlike this conversation, the elephant in the room is that migration is good for the economy, and it's necessary for an ageing population with a low birth rate. You need it more than ever. Just simple maths. That's not even an opinion. That's counting. But they won't say that out loud because they get attacked by the newspapers that they need the support of in order to get into Downing Street. And that, I think, describes Labour and the Tories now. Not so much Labour's going to end up with the support of these newspapers, but as James has just explained, it neutralises the attack line. You can't attack Labour for on the immigration front when Keir Starmer sounds like Rishi Sunak, or even more sounds than Rishi Sunak, as another caller suggested, Rick, I think. So what do the newspapers do? Answer, they don't know. Well, they do know. They find another target. So don't be surprised if you hear people encouraging you to hate on unemployed, people on sickness benefit or disability benefit, people who can't work, benefits claimants who can't work, can't seek work. And I think probably at the front of the queue would be the eco-protesters. The idea that throwing a little bit of paint around at the Chelsea Flower Show is national front page news is objectively ridiculous, right? Objectively ridiculous. In a country with a cost of living crisis, energy bills still absolutely sky high. You've got massive problems with inflation. You've got, some goodish news from the IMF this week. Things aren't going to be quite as bad as they would have been if Jeremy Hunt hadn't worked to undo much of the damage done by Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. But you have a look at the state of the United Kingdom and tell me that the biggest story in town is a few environmental protesters throwing some paint around at the Chelsea Flower Show. But that's what they'll try and persuade you next. That's what the Daily Mail's trying to persuade you today. Exactly the same people that persuaded us to vote for Brexit or persuaded that immigration was the root of all evil. Who are they going to go after next? Eco-protesters and people on disability benefits. And remember, if it's Brexit related, I haven't got a prediction wrong yet. It is 10:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So the question remains, really, but lots more answers to it. There is that little bit that's missing in that so the newspaper's calculation is that going after the immigration figures like a rat up a drain pipe, which they could have been relied upon to do at pretty much any other point previous in British history, never mind in the last 13 years, would be suboptimal because the Tories would be the ones getting it in the neck. I don't know. I just don't. There's a bit missing, isn't there? I do think the really big issue driving right-wing media at the moment is the question of non-dom status and the genuine conviction Keir Starmer has for all his flip-flopping in other areas. The one thing he keeps saying, in fact, he says it so often that they've started accusing him, and I've done this myself, accusing him of trying to spend the money twice. But the money he thinks he will raise by abolishing non-dom status will go into specified areas. Some analysis says he won't raise any money at all. I could live with that. I don't think you should be allowed to own a newspaper in this country if you don't pay the same rate of tax on your income in this country that I do. I just think that's absolutely insane that you can have a foreign billionaire like Rupert Murdoch or a non-dom billionaire like Viscount Rothermere controlling our news agenda while not even being sufficiently invested in the country to pay income tax at the same rate that I pay it or the same rate that you pay it. I don't think that the wife of the Prime Minister should be able to arrange her finances in a way that allows her to pay less tax on her income in this country than I do or you do. I think it is absolutely ridiculous, actually. It's a really good example of how bent we are. The sheer and obvious absurdity of it. It almost feels controversial pointing it out because the agenda has been set entirely by people who benefit from it. It's insane, right? That you can own a newspaper and use it to encourage a population to vote for something like Brexit without actually being sufficiently invested in that country whose future you have more influence over than anybody who lives here. You can do it from a foreign country as a non-dom taxpayer. Just think about that for a minute. Absolutely insane. Regardless of whether it raises a ton of money that can go to the NHS or pay for this or pay for that. It's insane that you can own a newspaper while not being domiciled here for tax purposes or any news. Quite crackers, but Here we are. So that's a big part of it, a big part of why they would be spooked by Labour, I think. It's possibly the most courageous part of Starmer's policy platform so far in terms of real politics, in terms of actually wanting to get into Downing Street. Flips around on a lot of issues, but not on that one, which could be the most important one of all. Shane is back to Leeds. A lot of Yorkshire calls today. Shane's in Leeds. Shane, what would you like to say?
Hi again, James.
Hello, Shane.
Can I just say, first of all, a big thank you to you?
Of course you can.
What have I done?
What have I done now, Shane?
I watched a bit of your TV show.
Yes.
On a popular video streaming site the other day.
Oh yes.
And I didn't realise you'd been talking about this issue for quite as long as you have.
Oh, forever.
Yeah, you look very young, by the way.
Well, that's because they made me shave my beard off. Depending on which TV show it is, I don't know. I've done a few, but if it was the one where I had my name above the door, it was
that's the one.
Yes, it was an interesting adventure into into the world of television, and not an entirely happy one. But I don't think I look that much younger than I do now. I just shaved my beard off. But anyway, on we go.
Yes. Unfortunately, everybody else has pretty much covered what I was going to say.
Well, don't do yourself down. I'm sure you can think of something.
I agree that it's largely down to the failure of Brexit.
Do you think so?
When you've got business leaders, the NHS, and everybody else say we need more immigration, we need more skilled workers. Yes. You can't then turn around and say, well, we failed for the last 10 years. We got what we wanted, and it's been an absolute disaster. And I just want to say that as well.
And who are you going to put up to say, no, we don't need people coming in to do jobs that are currently vacant? I mean, the I newspaper today must have made a lot of phone calls trying to find someone to argue the opposite, because they ended up with Jonathan Gullis.
The likes of that numpty on GB News who thought that Suella Braverman should be given the keys to number 10.
Gosh. I don't want to speak ill of anyone who's not here to defend themselves, but that does sound like an eccentric position to adopt. Why aren't the newspapers doing it then? Simply, in a nutshell, because they could still sell papers. The appetite must still be there for a little bit of racist red meat. Why are the newspapers not going in on it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is, except for a small percentage of the Conservative Party membership.
Yeah, you could be right. Or the sort of post-UKIP constituency. That's interesting, because one of my theories, such as they are, is that the migration of toxicity from the comments section of newspapers into mainstream broadcasting, which Shane has just alluded to, did untold damage. So a couple of people have pointed out today that the Guardian story about deporting potentially 3,000 refugees and asylum seekers, I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. I think Suella Braverman's plan is to be scuppered by lawyers and then start complaining about lawyers, so we can add them to the list of people who are going to be demonised in the near to middle future. But the toxic comment section, I remember the first time I stumbled across them, I was staggered by what I saw. And then within a year or 2 years or 5 years, I was hearing those calls on the radio. And then a little bit after that, I was seeing people who were leaders of political parties making exactly the same points on the telly. You could never get Farage off Question Time, and he sounded like, British Bulldog 101 commenting on the Guardian or the Daily Mail comment section. 10:57 is the time. I just want to give a little advert for my friends, the newsagents, because this chap, Gitto Harry, who worked for Boris Johnson, has been doing the rounds, demonstrating, I think, a very helpful insight into just how daft you have to be a Boris Johnson cheerleader these days. Have a listen to Emily Maitlis and John Sopel providing a journalism masterclass that I'm not sure they would have been able to do at the BBC. And if they had done it at the BBC, Downing Street would have been on the phone the next morning telling their bosses to tell them to wind their necks in.
Essentially, I think Boris would have been Prime Minister anyway. And if he hadn't done Brexit, he'd have gone in there as a less divisive figure, and he'd probably still be in power now. Brexit was massively divisive. And Brexit was the start of this allegation that he's a liar. Because in all the time I've known him, which is decades, and all the time I worked for him at City Hall, nobody thought he was a liar then.
Well, hang on. He got fired by Michael Howard for lying.
He got
fired by his newspaper.
For not spilling it out
his
about an
newspaper.
affair. Yeah, for not spilling it out of an affair, and he made up a quote. I'm sure he's not the only person to do that. I'm not going to defend that.
But
you know,
to say
in a career as public and as high profile and political as his, they're two quite minor charges. As Mayor of London, he got re-elected in a left-leaning city, mid-recession, mid-term of a Conservative government, after an omni-shambles government, because in the first term he delivered almost everything that he promised the people of London that he would do.
No, look, I don't doubt
that
he's a serious, but I don't doubt that he's got a great talent as a politician.
Guido, can I just tell you something? The first time I interviewed Donald Trump, he lied to me about having the biggest ballroom in New York. And I let it go because it was like, who the cares? It's a ballroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in 2020, he lied about winning an election he lost, and it created a riot and the attempt to overturn democracy.
So there are lies and lies. There are lies that don't really matter.
Well,
and there are lies that do matter.
There are consistent patterns of behaviour, and perhaps
you
should have seen that.
We're not going to agree on this.
You went to work for a man you knew was a consistent liar. And when you say Brexit was divisive, it was worse than that. It was destructive. He continually misled this country. You went to work for a man you knew was lying and misleading, and had lied to the Queen about the prorogation of Parliament, and had lied about Partygate, and had thrown Allegra Stratton under the bus. I mean, there's always buses with Boris. You knew that was the culture in which you were working. And people can feel rightly furious that this stuff is still going on and still coming out.
And remember, calling him a liar still gets you targeted by the right-wing media, even when there's so much evidence. Emily Malis and ably assisted by John Sopel, they're barbecuing this Guito Harry character, who did indeed go to work for a massive liar, and then claimed he wasn't a liar in City Hall, which is why, of course, he didn't close any fire stations or tube stations, and why we had a amnesty on illegal immigration as well, which was one of his. I don't think that was a manifesto pledge, but it was a campaign pledge. Man can't lie straight in bed. Imagine turning up on a podcast as popular as the newsagents and claiming that Boris Johnson only started lying when he became the leader of the Brexit campaign. He got fired from the Times for lying and fired from the Tory front bench for lying. Those are big deals, but not in Guito Harry's world. What are we going to do next? All right, do you want to play a game? I want you to imagine a fictional radio station, okay, a theoretical radio station. Now, imagine on that radio station, 75 to 80% of the presenters were racist, okay, and really quite spectacularly so. So some, let's say, in our theoretical universe, would shame themselves so completely on social media, for example, that they ended up not only being fired from the fictional radio station, but also becoming effective pariahs. But in the, the mid-morning slot, there was a bloke called John O'Neill, who was not a racist. In fact, he was passionately anti-racist and argued his position passionately every day for years, until slowly the radio station began to change around him and became markedly less given to the kind of provocative, rabble-rousing rhetoric that is still very popular in the Daily Mail. Now, at the point when the lineup on that radio station was full of racists, would that radio station, let's call it, I don't know, let's call it Clarion FM, would that radio station have been institutionally racist, even though John O'Neill was in the mid-morning slot fighting the good fight and doing the work of the angels? Yeah, it would, wouldn't it? Of course it would. Taken as a whole, the policies and practices that were running through that organisation would have been skewed in such a way as to be unfair or harmful in its treatment of others based on race. But poor old John O'Neill in the mid-morning slot, called, let's call it Mid-Morning Matters, he is part of an institutionally racist organisation despite being an avowed enemy of racism. Now, that is a very simple little illustration for you of what institutional racism means. And I refuse to believe that it's difficult to understand. I mean, I truly refuse to believe that it is difficult to understand. In the case of the police, it means that if you're black, you are likely to be treated very differently from how you would be treated if you were white. And, stop and search figures most obviously would demonstrate that in recent years, but all manner of other issues as well. If you look at maternity services in the NHS and the fact that black mothers are more likely to suffer complications, up to and including tragedy in the labour ward than white mothers, there is institutional racism. It doesn't even mean that anybody in the ward is doing a sort of Alf Garnett tribute act. It just means that the practices and policies in place have evolved through a period of time to arrive at a place where people are going to be treated differently according to their skin colour. So for an institution to be institutionally racist, or in the case of Police Scotland, to suffer from institutional racism, sexism, misogyny and discrimination, is a supremely uncomplicated concept to comprehend. Couldn't resist the little alliteration at the end there. I should have said understand, shouldn't I? A supremely simple concept to understand, a supremely uncomplicated concept to comprehend. And yet they insist on not understanding it. The Telegraph's comment page today is characteristically crackers. So Ian Livingston, the outgoing Chief Constable of Police Scotland, is the one who's made these comments. Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory. It's, I think, the first time a police chief has called a spade in this case. And the Telegraph insists that they must never do it again because even though Sir Ian made it absolutely clear that he was in no way suggesting that everybody within the force was in any way racist, sexist or misogynistic, the Telegraph's point in its leader seems to be, even though he made it absolutely clear that that wasn't his point, some people might think that it is. I don't know how. I mean, how do you write this stuff? Do you think? How do you take some words said by a bloke and then write an article saying, well, he's actually done the exact opposite of what he said he was doing? So I sit here and I say to you, this programme is institutionally racist, right? By that, I do not mean that Keith is racist. I just mean that the way we conduct the programme every day means that we're treating black people worse than we treat white people. I say that to you, but Keith's not racist. Keith's the least racist person I know. How hard is it to understand what institutional racism means in that context? It's the organisation has systemic racism in its policies and practices. So I do. I think I do. I'd like to be wrong. But when organisations like the Telegraph go after not the racism, but the person calling it out, they're proving the existence of institutional racism, aren't they? I mean, they're kind of proving that the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph are institutionally racist. Because there's someone over here who works for an organisation at the very top of it, and he is describing that organisation accurately. The Telegraph knows what institutional racism means. Everybody knows what institutional racism means. But there seems to be a desperation in some corners of the country, and the commentariat, to pretend that they don't know what it means. Oh, you can't call that institution institutionally racist even though it is institutionally racist because some of the people in the institution who don't think they're racist might be upset and think that you're calling them racist. I mean, am I missing something here? Or is that breathtakingly stupid, patronising and institutionally racist? The question I want to ask you, and I don't know if it's going to work as a phone-in, is this. Do you have to be suffering from institutional racism to argue that people shouldn't use the phrase institutional racism? Do you think that'll work as a phone-in, or is it a little bit too Russian doll? Is it a little bit too chicken and egg? Do you have to be suffering from institutional racism in order to argue that we shouldn't use the phrase institutional racism? Should we see? Should we suck it and see? Should I throw it out and see what happens? We should probably have these conversations off air, but then you wouldn't feel as involved as you do at this point in proceedings. So let's have a look, okay? Because quite a lot of people calling for John O'Neill to be brought back to the mid-morning matters. I don't know what he's doing these days. I think he's on North Norfolk Digital. So there it is. I hear it a lot, and I'm reading it today in the Daily Telegraph. If I read you a little more of it, some campaigners argue that only by accepting the institutional nature of the problem can it be correctly addressed. They resist the idea that a small number of bad apples can be blamed for the appalling criminality and misconduct that has been found within police forces. I think Louise Casey's last report into the Met specifically said this is not a case of a few bad apples spoiling the whole barrel. Certainly one of the reports into the countless cases of Metropolitan Police misconduct or police misconduct has specifically stated that the bad apple defence no longer works. But here is the possibly institutionally racist Daily Telegraph editorial saying that the idea that a small number of bad apples can be blamed for the appalling criminality and misconduct, that idea is being resisted. So they go on to argue that he's tarring everyone in Police Scotland with the same brush. This is the bit that's beautiful. Listen to this. Imagine being a journalist that has to write this bilge. Luckily, on the op-ed pages, they don't have to put their name on it. But the leader writers on the Daily Telegraph, one of them actually wrote this. Are you ready for this? This is quite incredible. Even if he made pains to assert that he did not mean that all individual staff or officers were racist or sexist, that is inevitably how many people will interpret his remarks. That's beautiful. That's magnificent writing that. So even though he said, I'm not doing this thing, me, Daily Telegraph leader writer, is going to say that a lot of people think that you are. So even though I am standing in front of you saying I am not a banana, an awful lot of people are going to come away from this conversation believing that you are a banana. And what more can a man do than say, I'm categorically not insinuating or suggesting that everybody in Police Scotland is sexist or racist, but once you've put it through the lens of the absolutely crazy right-wing media, what he is actually saying when he says he's not doing that thing, he's actually doing that thing. So how stupid do you have to be to pretend that the phrase institutional racism is dangerous because it might tar innocent people with the brush of guilt? Or is it a conscious attempt to deny the existence of institutional racism because either consciously or subconsciously you're institutionally racist, or you are part of institutional racism? I find this absolutely fascinating. That line there, the producer read it to me earlier. I thought she was joking. Even if he made pains to assert that he did not mean that all individual staff or officers were racist or sexist, that is inevitably how many people will interpret his remarks. Now, I think that was the defence that Mark Rowley gave for rejecting the phrase institutional racism after it was used by Louise Casey in her investigation into why the Metropolitan Police is such a sewage farm these days. He said no, and of course all the right-wing journalists queuing, oh, good old him, yes, good old him, no such thing as institution. And how boiled does your brain have to be to hear somebody say, I'm categorically not doing X, and then you go away and write an article about, oh, he needs to be careful, that bloke doing X over there. Should have used a figure other than X, shouldn't I? Because it sounds like I'm suggesting they took ecstasy now, which I'm categorically not, for the record. So let's try it, all right? This is on you. I don't think this is going to work, but you know me, I like to back an outsider on a daily basis, at least once a show. When people say that they don't think the phrase institutional racism should be used to describe institutionally racist institutions, what are they really saying? 0345 6060 973. Are they consciously stroke subconsciously proving and demonstrating what institutional racism is? Because the level of mental gymnastics required to write that line there is actually beyond me. Genuinely beyond. Not a lot is beyond me. That is beyond me. The level of mental gymnastics required to write, even if he made pains to assert that he did not mean that all individual staff or officers were racist or sexist, that is inevitably how many people will interpret his remarks. There's a bit missing from that paragraph, isn't it? I'll tell you what's missing from that paragraph. Even if he made pains to assert that he did not mean that all individual staff or officers were racist or sexist, that is inevitably how many people will interpret his remarks, because those people are absolutely determined to refuse to admit that institutional racism is a real and present danger in this country and in these institutions. These people, who probably indulge in a little bit of racism on a regular basis when talking about, say, stop and search statistics, are categorically determined that institutional racism should not be a phrase introduced into public discourse, because they're absolutely terrified that whenever it's used, someone pops a mirror in front of them and they see their own cheery features staring back. So how can you possibly claim, in a country that now has some of the highest reading levels in the world, and still exceptional education levels, how can you possibly claim, well, you shouldn't use a phrase like institutional racism, because after you've explained what it means, some people may not understand what it means? I'm right, aren't I? You use that phrase, you make that argument like Mark Rowley made it, you're either excusing institutional racism or endorsing it. Oh, we can't use that phrase, might upset people. I thought you lot were supposed to believe that the facts don't care about your feelings. Facts are, it's institutionally racist. How do I know that? The bloody Chief Constable said so. But here's Chummo in the Daily Telegraph. So, oh no, he can't use that phrase. Because I know he explained that he didn't mean everyone in Police Scotland is institutionally racist. I know he explained it categorically and clearly. But some people are going to believe that he did mean that. Because I'm going to tell him that he did in my newspaper column. Even though I know it's not true. Wow. So what does the phrase mean to you? No, that doesn't work. I'm backing off. I'm backing off the challenge that I set myself, aren't I? Right, let's do it. See if it works. All right, I'll give myself one little get-out clause. I'll give you one. So the original question is, does the denial of the existence of institutional racism mean that you are part of institutional racism? 0345 6060 973. But the second question is, how can anybody claim not to understand what it means? Or are they just condescending and patronising? They say, well, I know what it means, but there's so many coppers who aren't very bright that they'll think that he's talking about them. It's actually a bit like the mad one I just went off on non-doms. The more you think about this, the more insane it is. You've got an institutionally racist police force and a chief constable finding the crystals to stand up and say so. And then the right-wing media don't go after the racists or the racism, they go after the copper who's calling it out. Why? Well, they must be institutionally racist. Anyway, I'll open up the phone lines now. I've given you enough of my thoughts. I may not have framed it into a neat and clear question, but goodness knows, by now you should be used to that. 0345 6060 973. Senior cop calls his own police force institutionally racist. Right-wing media attacks him for using a phrase that he's explained the meaning of, but they claim their readers or other coppers, or possibly you're too thick to understand what it actually means, and you might think that he is actually calling you a racist when he's made it crystal clear that he is not. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. It's 11:18. I think I've just done a thing. 15 minutes that was, roughly, was it, Keith, that introduction, give or take? And really what I'm asking is this. Why don't some people want institutionally racist organisations to be called institutionally racist, up to and including the people that run those institutions? That's the question. Why are some people made so uncomfortable by the very idea of an institutionally racist organisation being called institutionally racist? I mean, it's incredible. Really, this Telegraph piece. Judging by a recent review, there is clearly an uncomfortable number of racist and misogynistic officers in Police Scotland, as well as serious issues with how complaints are dealt with. That is a definition of institutional racism and misogyny, especially the bit about the way complaints are dealt with. But this article continues. But resorting to such easily misinterpreted generalisations, they're not easily misinterpreted. They're willfully misinterpreted by people like whoever wrote this article or whoever told them to. It's quite breathtaking. So there's the question, all right? Why does the description of an institution that everybody agrees is institutionally racist, why does describing it as institutionally racist cause a certain type of right-wing commentator to have a fit of the vapours? I really want you to think about that. I want you to answer it from whatever angle you want. But no one's disputing that this institution is institutionally racist, right? The argument is, oh, you shouldn't call it that because it might upset some people. So why does that phrase, that accurately used phrase, because if you were arguing that it's not accurately used, you'd have a point, but you're not. They're not saying that. They're saying it's accurately used, but it shouldn't be used because reasons. What are those real reasons? 0345 6060 973. I should take some calls, shouldn't I? I got my teeth into this one. I wasn't sure I was going to. Julie's in Islington. Julie, what's going on here? What would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First time caller.
Welcome.
So a little bit nervous.
Don't be.
Yeah, I think as a community, this institutional racism, it's slaying the dragon. It's kind of the elephant in the room that kind of has been hidden, and we're finally talking about it. So I'm black, and I've grown up in a period where no one really talked about it. You sort of simulated in kind of, if anyone was racist to you or there was anything like, subtle said to you, you just didn't say anything, you kind of got on with it.
Or if you did, you had a chip on your shoulder or you were playing the race card.
Exactly. But obviously over the sort of last 3-4 years, it's now become very, very loud, and the denial stage is over. But there's a book that I highly recommend everyone reads called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and it talks about how as soon as you say the word racist to anyone, people sort of understand the repercussions of it. So there's such a nerve to even talk about it. We're now at the moment in denial stage. It's kind of like, I'll put my fingers in my ears, la 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 la. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But because the dragon does not want to be slayed.
I hear you. And obviously, I'm almost certainly about to engage in white fragility because we're beyond the denial now because that's the weird bit about where we are today. Is that everyone agrees that institution is institutionally racist. So they're picking away at the vocabulary of it rather than the reality of it.
But it's past the buck. Okay. It's like, it's going, I don't want to, it might be, but I don't want to be with that label because we're not, it's the literal denial stage of like, if you say that we're institutionally racist, then we've got to accept it, and that means you're going to be pointing at people within to say that we're racist. And number two, we actually have to deal with it. We have to do something about it. We have to dismantle it. And I just, even though like it's kind of the acceptance that it exists, but then there's also the denial stage of like, but not me. You can't put it to me because it's nothing to do with me.
Well, look, it might be true, but don't say it out loud.
Yes.
So the Telegraph piece goes on. It's hardly likely to encourage people, particularly women and ethnic minorities, to believe that most officers are not dangerous, but instead they're allies in the fight against criminality. So it might be true, but don't tell anyone.
But then I think what it is, James, at the moment, there's a massive fear from, dare I say it, the elite or the people in power, that people are actually waking up and actually saying, no, I'm not putting up with this. And from all walks of life, from everything, just, ethnic,
well, you don't get much more elite or people in power than the chief constable of a national police force. He's come out and said it, and the Telegraph and various other right-wing wingnuts are going after him instead of the racism.
Yes, but then that's the point. It's kind of like you just said, like, but don't tell anyone about it because there's going to be a riot.
All right, what about me? Well, let's pretend I'm a newspaper columnist and I am, in good faith, writing a piece about how I think this is very... I appreciate there have been some terrible things done by the police lately, but in good faith, I genuinely don't believe that this phrase is helpful. What's going on in my head?
Well, there's the white fragility, because obviously you don't understand. That's the thing. If you don't understand, you don't get it, because you haven't experienced it. You don't get it. You don't understand it. I'm pretty sure that if there are journalists of minority groups, more of them in there, they would maybe be able to kind of talk to their colleagues to kind of say, well, actually, break it down and be like, this is what we mean. You're not saying everyone is racist. Institutionally racist and someone being racist are two different things.
That's so obvious and easy to understand that it's a miracle a newspaper that was once as august as the Daily Telegraph is pretending that it's somehow difficult to grasp. I'll tell you what I've just realised. I'm looking at your chronology and I mean, the conversation that we're having now means that things are improving and are getting better, because 10 years ago, and I think I was in this job, I can remember hearing white people deny the existence. The existence of it. So someone would come out and say that, for example, is racist. Stop and search policy 10 years ago, that's racist. And I would hear white people on the radio ringing me to say, no, it isn't. I said, how the hell do you know?
But then this is the whole thing, the education piece. There is kind of a pushback for the education piece. For people to kind of learn, because obviously it's actually having to look yourself in the mirror and go, what part do I play in? So people do not want to be demonised. They don't want to be the bad guy.
It's gradations, isn't it? So look, 10 years ago, I'd have been sitting here denying that racism actually exists and bigging up Stop and Search and being all in favour of the idea. What was interesting during lockdown is when elderly white men started getting treated indiscriminately by the police, they suddenly found the idea absolutely obnoxious. But when it was young black men that it happened to on a daily basis, they were absolutely fine with it. But so I've gone from denying it entirely to now denying the scale of the problem. So institutional racism is a description of scale, and I don't want to... why can't I admit the scale? Why couldn't...
I don't want to be associated. They don't want to be associated. It's the whole, it's the demonisation. Because if you're saying that something is institutionally racist, you've got to take accountability of the part you play in it.
Yeah.
And that's where people. I'm not racist. I've got black friends. I've got brown friends.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's the actual denial of. Well, that means that I'm going to be implicated in it, and I don't want to have to deal with it.
You've answered my next question. That bit on the end about because I'd say, why don't you want to be implicated in it? What's the problem? You call it out, you own it, and you try and improve. But I don't want to put the effort in that's involved, especially if I've been writing this build for 20 years. If I've been dining out on my stop and search ideas and you're playing the race card, or you've got a chip on your shoulder, a little bit of casual abuse of Diane Abbott. Crikey, I'm going to have to redraw my whole act.
Yep.
So that's why I have to write an article today.
Same with
Brexit.
Hate the B word.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anybody who pretends not to understand what institutional racism means who didn't vote for Brexit.
Indeed.
I shall leave that question hanging, Julie. Thank you very much. That was extremely helpful, and a book recommendation to boot. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. Police Scotland is racist and sexist, Chief Constable admits. Institutionally racist and discriminatory. And how does the Daily Telegraph respond? By complaining about the language that he's used. I don't know if you were listening yesterday when we spoke to Dan Casita, a chemical weapons expert who's been essentially no-platformed by the government as a consequence of rules brought in by Jacob Rees-Mogg that mean if you say mean things about Jacob Rees-Mogg on Twitter, then you'll get banned from sharing your expertise on chemical warfare with civil servants and members of the government. But increasingly, this lot end up looking a lot like the thing that they claim their enemies are. So on that occasion, freedom of speech would be under siege. And on this occasion, it's words. It's just words. You're getting cross about the words being used to describe something terrible. So what is the real reason why people like this Daily Telegraph writer are so determined to pretend that the phrase institutional racism is unhelpful, even as they admit it's entirely accurate? 11:34 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. 034, not as many as I feared, I'll be honest. 0345 6060 973. So I think I got the question right after 15 minutes, but hey-ho. Paul's in Greenwich. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello, Paul.
Hello. So, I wanted to say the lady that spoke just before me as well. She covered a lot of the points that I was going to make actually very eloquently. But I do think that with the phrase institutionally racist, I think they could be clearer as to, in the particular circumstances, so in this case the Chief Constable, as to what that actually constitutes, what that means. Because I would find it difficult to sort of imagine
it means that if you're in the institution, either as a participant, i.e. a police officer, or as a consumer, as in a member of the public, then you will be treated differently according to the colour of your skin, Paul.
Yeah, sure.
Is that clear? Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Is that what the Chief Constable outlined I think if they could
what else do you think?
I absolutely don't agree.
No, but what else do you think it might mean?
I don't think it's not so much about what it means. It's about what it might mean for individuals on the ground. So you've got people now in Scotland who may be subject to a stop from the police. What's that Chief Constable saying? How are his officers going to act, and how can people who might be subject to that prejudice, to that sort of racism, what can they expect? And I think moreover as well, unless they identify it, how do they come up with a solution to resolve it?
Well, he is identifying it.
Okay.
So the phone-in is about why would people object to him identifying it?
Yeah, no, yeah, sure. No, I get that. But I think it probably needs to come up with more solutions as to what they're going to do.
Well, he can't. I mean, we're not going to come up with solutions while people like the Daily Telegraph... Hang on. We can't come up with solutions until we've worked out why some people are so desperate to get rid of the description of the problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have no issue with the description. However, I would say that if an institution is institutionally racist, they could be a little bit clearer as to, because to my mind, an organisation can't be institutionally racist unless there's a fair number of people within, a good percentage of people within that organisation who are either racist themselves or are prepared to tolerate racism within the organisation they're a part of.
That's exactly what it means. I mean, it's a fascinating position that you hold, because most of the complaints about the phrase is that it's too clear what it means. Not that it's not clear enough. You've literally just described what it means yourself.
Yeah, but what I was saying to the lady earlier as well, before I came on, is that there seems to be a bit of a get-out with it, because to my mind, if an organisation is institutionally racist, I'm sorry, but it's racist. It just is. And I think for the Chief Constable to be able to say, well, it's institutionally racist, but that doesn't mean that X amount or a certain...
It doesn't mean every single person in it is racist. I don't think he needs to add that, but given that we live in a world where the Daily Telegraph pretends not to understand what it means, he felt he should add it, and the Daily Telegraph responded by saying, well, look, even though he added it, I'm still going to go for the willful misinterpretation of what the phrase actually means. I'll be honest with you, Paul, I'm not 100% sure what point you're making.
It's really that, to my mind, for an organisation to be institutionally racist, a large number of people within that organisation...
No, I know, you've said that already. That's what he is...
And I think that they need to be a little bit clearer about that.
But how could it be clearer? What would be clearer?
They could be very clear in that, look, we have a large percentage of people within our organisation who are racist.
But that's what institutionally racist means.
Who tolerate racism.
But it's not just people, remember, because that... okay, this might help you.
He didn't say that.
No, I'm about to explain to you, Paul, it's not just people, it would be systems, it would be policies in place. So it wouldn't just be Alf Garnett tribute acts in the police canteen. It would be an unchallenged or an unquestioned behaviour towards people based upon their ethnicity. Think about black women on labour wards, black women on maternity wards who do not get as much care as white women do. It's baked in. It's not conscious racism. It's institutional racism.
I'm sorry, but if you've got a midwife or a police officer, for that matter, who treats somebody worse because of their colour,
they don't know they're doing it. They don't know. But that's the difference between conscious bias. Well, hang on. What do you think unconscious? What do you think unconscious means?
Well, it means. I mean, I know what unconscious means.
Well, just remind me.
Well, it's somebody's not breathing. But no, in the way that you're using it, fine. But I'm sorry.
Just remind me what it means. Remind me what it means, because you're denying the existence of it. I think it's important to define words. What does unconscious mean in the context of bias or racism?
Well, you're not aware of it.
Well, there you are, mate.
But I think
I wonder what that sounds like.
It's very difficult to make an argument that a police officer that treats somebody in a negative way because of their colour is doing that accidentally.
Not accidentally, unconsciously.
Well, either way, okay, they're treating somebody worse.
I'm still not clear. I'm still not 100% clear what point you were making. But what would be?
I just think that they should be a little bit clearer.
Okay, clearer than institutionally racist. They should be.
I think they should just call themselves racist.
Yes, but then that gets rid of the unconscious element of it, or the systemic element of it, or the fact that it might be a policy rather than a person that is racist. I mean, I can only. I've got a rule of three. If I've explained something 3 times to a caller, Paul, and they still persist in telling me that they don't understand, I kind of think we've probably reached something of an impasse. But I think that was a very helpful insight into what unconscious bias might. I mean, we defined it, didn't we, together, while you were denying that it existed. Alan is in Stourbridge. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, Alan.
How are you doing?
I'm very well. What's on your mind?
Well, so I think there's a lot of histrionics and semantic argument going on just to keep people distracted, to go, hey, look, it's not really racist. It definitely isn't really racist. And to the last caller's point, I think what he was trying to get to is that people, and I'm not saying it to defend him, but it's more of there is like, we're a country that is taught to study for the test. We're not a country that is taught to critically think and extend out of our experiences to what they might be, so we just immediately dismiss it.
I'm 99% sure that is not the point that the last caller was trying to make.
No, it's not. And I'm having a bit of a wonky one today. But
just concentrate on the point you rang in to make.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
So the point I was going to say is about it comes down to this kind of education system that teaches us for the test, right? I mean, it teaches us that police are fine and nurses are fine and doctors are fine, and all these people do these things and they are important, and that's it, end of, don't question it. Yeah. And I have a sort of a thing with my wife all the time where I'll throw up the phrase ACAB about police, because my experience of police is that they're generally terrible. And it's been known for years. And I think we keep hearing stuff like institutionally racist, and then it's like, well, how does anyone respond to that if they don't know, if they've not taught it, so they just kick it back? And I feel like
But you're missing the willfulness. You're missing the willfulness. There's no earthly way that the Oxbridge graduate writing an opinion piece for the leader page of the Daily Telegraph struggles to understand what it means. It's simply not possible. Otherwise, they demand that the parents should get a refund on all the school fees. So it's the willfulness. It's someone in my profession. It's a prominent communicator publicly claiming that it's unhelpful, or publicly claiming not to understand it, or that it's misleading, even as the man who has used the phrase has clarified completely what he means by it. Why would anybody want to pretend that they didn't understand it?
Well, I think what it says is a lot about these journalists is that it shows the level of respect that they have for their audience, and it shows that they go, well, these lot will believe anything I'll put, so sod it, I'll just put this down or I'll put that down.
Yeah.
And it's just this, let's keep talking about stuff that doesn't, it's ephemeral, we keep talking about, you throw the phrase around enough and it stops losing any meaning.
Let's not talk about the racism. Yeah, that's what you meant by semantic histrionics. Let's not talk about the racism. Let's not talk about the issue. Let's not talk about the systemic failings and failures. Let's talk about the language.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
That's what they're doing.
Yes.
That's it, isn't it?
Again, it feeds back into this education thing, because most people, if you critically think about it, you can kick that back with, like as you've done all morning, you can kick it back and go, no, it's nonsense, it's ridiculous. Like, this is what the guy said, it's true, we should follow up on that and do it. But I think when those kind of statements from people in power, as with this police dude, like, the other bits of power go, no, you're not supposed to reveal it. Yeah, you're not supposed to show behind the curtain.
And then that's how you end up reaching for these quite incredible justifications of your demand that people don't say it out loud, including it's hardly likely to encourage people, particularly women and ethnic minorities, to believe that most officers are not dangerous, but instead they're allies in the fight against criminality. Except, of course, that the words that the chief constable actually said give the complete lie to that nonsense. Truly, he said, I recognise and understand that conflict and have experienced it myself. This is the conflict between the phrase and the interpretation, if you like. Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory. Publicly acknowledging these institutional issues exist within our organisation is essential to our absolute commitment to championing equality and becoming an anti-racist service. It is also critical to our determination to lead and support wider change in society. So maybe part of the motivation of people pretending not to understand what the phrase actually means is that they don't want an anti-racist police service. Until they explain themselves, I guess we'll just have to leave that question hanging. Thank you, Alan. Lovely stuff from the heart of the West Midlands. It's 11:46. It's 10 to 12 already. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. I found it very helpful. The idea. Sometimes something gets normalised so quickly that you lose sight of how abnormal it is. But when you have one of the most senior police officers in the country describing his own force as being institutionally racist and discriminatory, while also acknowledging it's improved, it's come on in leaps and bounds in the time that he's been there, just simply pointing out there's a lot further to go. And then you have voices, prominent voices, including the Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police, remember, Sir Mark Rowley, objecting to the actual language, even when it's used by the head of a review into his own police force, in Rowley's case by Louise Casey. Describing his force as institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. Mark Rowley argues that the term is ambiguous and political. His job is to make sure that it isn't. His job is to do what Sir Ian Livingstone has done and to use the phrase accurately and to describe what it means. And then all the little mewling infants in the right-wing media who pretend not to understand what it means when they understand all too well, they've got nowhere to hide. And instead, what the Telegraph can do today is set Mark Rowley up against Sir Ian Livingstone and pretend that the phrase is unhelpful because it's unclear what it means. And yet it's incredibly clear. This is pure gaslighting. Absolutely textbook. But it happens so quickly that you don't notice. So what are we talking about? What do they want us to be talking about? The language, not the racism. So, I mean, there's still room for challenge to the idea that anyone pretending or claiming not to understand what institutional racism means, or that the phrase is unhelpful because other people who aren't as clever as me may not understand what it means, they are institutionally racist. They are upholding it. There's a systemic reality in that position. So Mark Rowley is institutional. He's part of a racist institution, and he's demonstrating that by objecting to the phrase institutionally racist. It's incredible. I mean, it's almost like a perfect circle of here's a phrase to describe an organisation. Oh, I don't like that phrase. Well, that proves that it's accurate. It's almost too good to be true, too simple to be accurate. But if you don't acknowledge the reality of institutional racism, you are part of the problem, which means Sir Ian Livingstone is not part of the problem, but Sir Mark Rowley is. 11:52 is the time. Dave's in Winchester. Whenever I see Dave in Winchester on the screen, I always think of Minder.
Well, I'm not Minder, but...
no, I know, but wasn't Dave... Dave was the barman in the Winchester Club in Minder that Arthur Daly used to... So I don't know why. It's just a verbal association in my head. I see Dave Winchester and I think, I'll have a G&T, please. What do you want? A pint of lager for Terry. Carry on, Dave.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I guess that there's two aspects to this in my mind. One, that people that say, as you eloquently put earlier about you can't say racist things anymore, if you like, and there is a chilling effect because, you know, the majority of society doesn't want us to have them conversations. And so, you know, what we're seeing here is the opposite. And those that are saying that you can't talk about these subjects are now saying we shouldn't talk about these things. And I think it's because that these types of change don't happen just by chance.
Yes.
And
that's
and
very
the first
true.
Part,
yes.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about the comment sections in like some of the nastier places,
and all the places, all the comment sections are sewers because they get populated very, very quickly by people who want to say disgusting things. It's like a hobby. So, you know, the Guardian's comment is free was the first and the worst in many ways.
Yeah, and I believe it's like a flowchart. Like you kind of start in the undergrowth of things like that. And I think as a people, as a society, we know that you only really have change by having a conversation. And so the needle is only going to move by us talking about it. So there is a pushback, you know, because the same reasons that I believe you don't like seeing the headlines, the toxic headlines about migration and things like that, is because I think deep down you know that if that becomes part of our normal culture to talk about these types of things, the needle might start moving towards making it okay to you know, migration is a bad thing. And so I feel that we want to almost, or that side wants to almost repress the conversation about institutional racism.
It's all gone a bit national trust, hasn't it? So it might be true, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be reminded of it. So I don't like the signs in the National Trust houses that report the accurate history of this house. I just want to enjoy a scone and not have to worry about whether or not it was built. It was built on the back of slavery. And all right, the police might be institutionally racist, but can we just not carry on having a conversation about a few bad apples rather than properly recognising the true scale of the problem? How can we avoid recognising the true scale of the problem? We can pretend that it's the words that are problematic rather than the realities.
Yeah, and I feel that that's one of the reasons that we do, in many workplaces, we do the unconscious bias training and things like that, because it's almost impossible for us to see things from the other side. Yes. And I think that we kind of, the Daily Telegraph has a very generic readership, I suppose. And I feel that they deep down know that if we allow this conversation to happen, then things will change, and the privileged position will kind of be moved away because the readership is in a very comfortable position.
Yes. It's not just the Telegraph. There'll be plenty of other people on the right of the British media making exactly the same points for exactly the same deeply spurious and sinister reasons. But it's generous unconscious, isn't it? It's quite generous to say it's unconscious, and yet the people most furiously opposed to unconscious bias training are the people most in need of it, somewhat ironically.
But I would like to ask you, James, why is it you don't want to see the toxic headlines of migration being bad? Because deep down you probably know that if we talk about it, if it becomes normal to have that debate. Then
no, I don't mind the debate. It's the reason I don't like the headlines is because they're not honest.
Yeah.
So I deal with the results of that. I've been dealing with it for 20 years. The people who genuinely believe that their life is not going the way they want it to go because there are too many brown faces behind the tills in Sainsbury's, or the people who genuinely believe that Muslims are trying to take over the country. I mean, I see the results of it. I saw the results of it in person on Wednesday night when I did an event at the Royal Festival Hall with Sadiq Khan, and whatever they might be dressing up their objections as today, the main objection to Sadiq Khan from a huge number of people, up to and including Zach Goldsmith's mayoral campaign, of course, which deployed the same advisors and the same advice that every other Tory running for high office in the country has employed, were racist dog whistles. So I guess, to answer your question, I don't like racist dog whistles because of what they do to dogs.
Okay, and just to go on a slightly different tangent.
Hang on a minute. This isn't a podcast.
Okay.
No, go one more, quickly, Dave.
Okay. But if we didn't allow, if we did try to repress the Brexit narrative of how that happened, so do you think we still have Brexit if we had almost said no, we shouldn't talk about Brexit because it's going to give the idea air? Do you think if we had chilled that?
I don't understand the question.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that
just say it. Don't be shy.
But by having this conversation about institutional racism, it's the journey towards dealing with it. And I wonder if we had almost suppressed the conversation about Brexit, of like if we said we shouldn't be talking about leaving the EU and we shouldn't be doing that kind of things. Do you think?
No. Again, I think there's a category error in your question. So it's identical to your first question about racist dog whistles on front pages of the newspapers. So I'm happy. I think you need to have a debate about Brexit when people are jumping up and down demanding that we leave the European Union. What was missing from the conversation was the truth. The same with the racist front pages, and in many ways the same with people who don't like the phrase institutional racism. They don't want the truth. It's the truth that they don't want out there. And if the truth isn't out there, populations end up doing really stupid things, which brings us back to racism and Brexit.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much.
Are you satisfied with the answers I provided in your unscheduled interview of me?
Well, I would rate it 7 out of 10.
I'll take it.
That's
7's all right.
That's very complimentary.
Oh, well, you're clearly a very hard taskmaster. Many thanks. Can we squeeze in Martin in Hertford? Martin, I want to squeeze you in if I can. What would you like to say?
Hi, I was just listening to your previous callers and what you were saying. Personally, on a personal note, I'm retired as a police officer, retired in 2018.
Yes.
I found that just institutional racism sort of hit the radar of the police a few years ago now, with the Chief Constable, as you remember, the Chief Constable of the Greater Manchester Police, just after Lawrence, actually coming out with a very similar thing that the Chief of Police Scotland has said. And there was everyone throwing their arms up in the air at the time.
Oh, really? Plus ça change, eh?
Yeah, now, for me, what it did was, I didn't understand at that time what the phrase institutional racism actually meant, but I did look at it.
Yeah.
And it's to me, it was a very transformative thing because it made me take a bit of a critical, analytical look at my environment, where I was working, what was going on, and what I did myself. And I was quite shocked, really, because I recognised I started to see it. And the reason was because no one actually that phrase didn't attribute racism to me as a person.
Well, exactly.
It attributed it to the organisation.
Yes.
I thought Masters has created a safe space for me to start having a bit of a look and start to deconstruct. And that was quite a few years ago. I retired as an inspector, and I've spent sort of my entire career since then continually deconstructing where I work and what it looks like. And
and there it is. That was the starting point.
Incredibly helpful thing.
Well, it obviously is, and I can't think of a more compelling proof of that than yours. So, what are these people scared of? Do you think the ones saying, "Oh, you shouldn't use that phrase"? What's Mark Rowley scared of?
I think they met, in fairness. And Mark has come in on the back of the Force, taken an absolute battering by Mike Tyson from all sides of everything. And I think there's a tolerance level to criticism. So I think somewhere in his head he's thinking, somehow I've got to build up the confidence of the people of London in my force and try and get some semblance of restoration to where we want to be. And
the media people saying,
that mantle.
Yeah. Telling off Sir Ian Livingstone today. What are they scared of? Why are they scared of this phrase?
Well, you see, the whole thing about this institutional racism thing for me is, yes, the police can look at themselves, but it's actually a societal thing as well.
Of course.
I find media, the media in this country, the print media primarily, you're stuck with Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, Express, Sun, Red Top, that type of thing.
We start looking too closely at institutional racism, they'll be out of business.
It's there. It's there.
That's it, isn't it? Of course it is. And probably the entry point would be Stop and Search. Find out what someone thinks about Stop and Search historically, and you'll be able to predict to an absolute punctuation mark precisely how they feel about the police being described as institutionally racist. Thank you, Martin. Gosh, 12:01 is the time. 5 minutes after 12 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Did I imagine it, or did Gordon Brown claim to like the Arctic Monkeys at one point? I did. I'm sure he did. I've got to stop saying things on air that I might have just dreamt after eating a lot of cheese. I was thinking about it yesterday when I saw this footage of Rishi Sunak claiming that he reads Jilly Cooper books to his 10-year-old daughter. I thought, not the ones I read. And predictably enough, got picked up by the papers today. Turned out Jilly Cooper did actually write some children's books, but they seem to have been out of print for decades. So it is unlikely that's what he was talking about. I think he just said what he thought the kind of people that watch Good Morning Britain would want to hear. It seems to me highly unlikely that he's ever read a Jilly Cooper novel if he thought for a minute that it would be suitable reading for a 10-year-old girl. But maybe his older daughter is reading one, and he wasn't fully aware of. It's semi-pornographic in places, and he wasn't fully aware of that, and just thought it would be. It's a tough one. That's why I mentioned Gordon Brown saying that he liked Arctic Monkeys, but I might have dreamt that. I might have imagined that. What would you say if you were a politician and you were sitting on a breakfast television sofa, and they asked you what your favourite book was? Why wouldn't you just tell the truth? It's weird, isn't it? All that second guessing. Well, it's probably Ulysses by James Joyce. Ulysses by James Joyce is nobody's favourite book. I don't think it was even James Joyce's favourite book. His favourite book was probably Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, wouldn't it be? Maybe Dubliners, actually. Anyway. What's your favourite book? Oh, let me have a think. What's going to go down best with the audience? Wouldn't it be funny if nothing was ever recorded and we could see politicians claiming a completely different favourite book depending on exactly which audience they were in front of? So I'm giving a speech to the Oxford Union tomorrow. What's your favourite book? Oh, it's The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. Where are you on Tuesday? I'm giving an interview to The Sun. What's your favourite book? Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb. That's what it was like when he said Jilly Cooper, I think. Why am I talking about this? No idea. Just got a little bit distracted as I prepared to turn your attention to Cultural Friday. We do on Fridays attempt to sometimes finish our week together on a cultural conversation. And this is a really interesting one for me for a whole heap of reasons, but not least because of what you would loosely describe as the cultural hinterland of a country, currently led by a man who claims to read semi-pornographic novels to his children, which again seems highly unlikely. But when I was a kid, when I was 19 years old, I had a year off. All my mates, I must have told you this before, all my mates went off travelling on their gap years. And I ended up in Chorlton-cum-Hardy in Manchester. And I'm very glad I did. It was one of the most glorious experiences of my life. And I was trying to be an actor and failing miserably. But I did appear in plays and people did pay to come and see them. But there was absolutely no way at all I would have been able to live on what I was making. And all of my mates, I'd been working in River Island in Worcester for months, so I had quite a lot of savings when I moved up there. All of my mates, pretty much, were on income support and housing benefit. And some of them were quite good actors, as in quite successful. Some of them were actually getting parts. One of them was in Coronation Street, for example. One of them was in Children's Ward, the kids' BBC or kids' ITV programme. So they weren't working every month. And this meant that the nature of the welfare system at the time meant that they were okay. They'd sort of fill in a form or something and their income would change according to how much work they were getting. Right, I don't need to explain this any further. And then you get people like Sean Ryder, I think it was, of the Happy Mondays, telling me last time I interviewed him that the Happy Mondays wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the welfare state, because there was a kind of scheme in place. I think, didn't he leave the post office? He was working as a postman, and he left the post office to set up the band, and they got some sort of government loan because it kept you off the jobless figures, and it was almost like an investment loan to help you, in this case, set up a band. I think one of the Gallagher brothers has said that if it wasn't for income support, there would have been no Oasis. So the idea that you could get just enough to live on while you were trying to launch a career in a difficult area. And I was thinking about that today when I read an intervention from again, back to Coronation Street, Julie Hesmanhouch, who used to play Hayley, has said that you can't do it anymore. If you can't do that feast and famine thing that is intrinsic to a cultural life, if you're a musician or an actor, or even perhaps a writer, you can't do it anymore because the system doesn't accommodate the fact that you'll get paid one month and you might not get paid anything the next. The Union Equity and the University of Warwick have found that the minimum income floor on universal credit means that self-employed creatives are getting absolutely hammered. 41% of them had gone without essential items such as food or utilities. So nearly half of Equity members surveyed had been unable to pay bills at some point. 5% had given up their homes. And part of the reason for this is the so-called minimum income floor on universal credit. I don't fully understand the figures and the facts, so you will be able to help me out on that. But I want to put something on the record, and that is that this is really, really, really important. Do you know, back when it wasn't a far-right sewage farm, I wrote an article for The Spectator magazine, would you believe? For a cover article for The Spectator magazine, which was about how showbiz was being taken over by toffs. And you are going back now, probably over 20 years. Or certainly there or that. Yeah, over 20 years. And I called it. I spotted it happening because I lived a really cultural life in Manchester. There were loads of theatres and art centres. There still are. Manchester is an absolute cultural hub. It's a magnificent place. I was there last week and just popped into the Bridgewater Hall because the BBC Symphony Orchestra were doing a concert. I loved that. If you're staying in the centre of a town, I was on my Todd as well. I was doing some work with the charity I'm a trustee of, and I just thought, what's on in town tonight? It was a toss-up between seeing the new SpongeBob SquarePants musical at the Opera House or going to see the BBC Symphony Orchestra at Bridgewater Hall. You can tell I'm getting old. I plumped at the last moment to go for the BBC Symphony Orchestra at Bridgewater Hall, and it was an absolutely beautiful evening, truly beautiful. But I mentioned that Manchester was a cultural hub, and then I moved to London, got through college, came out of college, sort of turn of the millennium probably, and started noticing that showbiz was becoming increasingly monopolised by people who'd gone to private school, because the ability to wait around without starving is confined to people who've got a few quid or who have got wealthy parents. It doesn't have to be private school. That was just a useful peg for the purposes of the article that I wrote. But as a showbiz journalist, I just thought it was a little odd how many people I were interviewing who had backgrounds like mine. It wasn't obviously complete. This was a time when Oasis were in their pomp and Blur, and that's sort of art school and no school. There's no private school in those backgrounds. So it was far from a monopoly of the privately educated upon the arts. But my goodness me, it was getting increasingly disproportionate. And it can only have got worse in the intervening years. Now, this is a really important issue because it means that culture is being dominated by privilege. And people from less privileged backgrounds are having their access to cultural success or to a creative life stymied. Is it the Philharmonic, not the Symphony? I probably got that wrong. Thank you, Martin. Anyway, it was an orchestra. I find that, even as someone on the, if you like, the right side of the privilege, I find that heartbreaking. I find that really, 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 really sad. And I think it's very, very important. So Julie Hesmanhouse talks about setting up a fringe theatre company with friends in a basement, and Rufus Norris directed his first play there. She says it wouldn't be possible now if we were living under the benefit system that exists today. It refuses to accept artists as having a proper job. And she takes up the point I made a moment ago. We could sign on and get the dole and housing benefit and work ridiculously long and committed hours in that theatre, doing every aspect of it. And of course, it is an industry defined by low pay and freelance work. So the problem, of course, is the one we touched on in the first hour, which is where are they going to go next? Now that the migration fox has been shot, they can't really keep banging on about how awful immigration is when the Tories have been in for 13 years and it's higher than ever. So they're going to find new targets. We know that the unemployed will be a target. We know that people on disability benefit will be a target. We know that environmental protesters are currently leading the field on who is going to be the latest tabloid target for your unjustified hatred. Pretty hard, I think, to muster up much support for artists in the current climate, particularly when much of the cabinet looks like a cultural wasteland. Prime Minister claiming to be a Jilly Cooper aficionado. So what's the score? That's all I've got for this one. I've told you what I feel. I've told you what I thought. I've told you a little bit about my perspective on this, but it's 30 years old in many ways, 25 years old. What is the relationship between a creative life and the welfare state? How fair is it to say that if you are not from a relatively moneyed background, your chances of pursuing a creative career are disappearing at a rate of knots? It's a funny one, this. I'm going to, as ever, I'm going to trust you to keep me afloat until 1 o'clock. The number you need is 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'll go a little further. And I would remind you that the sworn enemy of fascism is empathy. Because if you can imagine what it's like to be somebody else, you are considerably less likely to go along with their persecution. Empathy comes from art. There is no better way of encouraging people to imagine what it would be like to be somebody else than to read somebody else's story, or to see somebody else's story on a stage, or hear it in a song, or clock it in a picture. So the sworn enemy of fascism is empathy, and the raison d'etre of creativity is also empathy. So you can see why the more right-wing an administration, the less concerned they might be with the creative arts, with the creation of empathy, not just of art. And that is just a little bit of subtext to why I think this is an important story. So how hard is it, if you haven't got money, to be creative for a career? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. How tough? And does it, here's the question as well, does it feel deliberate? Because it does to me. I'm not living it though. You are. Does it feel deliberate to you? 20 minutes after 12. Is there a deliberate air to the difficulties of people who don't have wealthy families getting into creative livelihoods? And why is it important? Okay, I've had a crack at explaining it. It's your turn. Jack's in Welshpool. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Absolutely adore the show.
Thank you, Jack. Lovely. Thank you.
It's like, but yeah, I completely agree that the government has done everything but basically cancel all budgets and stuff like that for the arts ever since the Tory government came into power. I mean, only last year they were putting out ads telling ballet dancers to become IT technicians instead because they saw there was. Yeah, because they said there was more need for IT technicians than people in the ballet, which I'm a bit like, for that ballet dancer, of course she doesn't want to be an IT technician because she's a ballet dancer. She adores doing ballet. Why the hell would she want to change being in Swan Lake to becoming an IT technician in the back end of Swindon. Like, it baffles me.
It doesn't, does it? You know exactly what's going on there. It's a bit like what they've done to education, and degrees that don't have an immediate monetary value have no value at all. So the notion of cultural enrichment.
They want to, because also, I mean, it's like there was talks in high school when I was in high school during 2015. There were talks about them trying to get rid of the drama subject.
Yes.
Until basically my entire class fought back against it and turned around and said, absolutely not. This is one thing that we want to do drama. And, I mean, hell, Rishi Sunak this year wanted to basically expand the education system so that you have to do math until the age of 18. And then you've got Simon Pegg criticising him going, what about the arts? What about people that don't want to be money-entering robots? Like, Rishi Sunak has obvious zero clue about the arts when he's talking about that Jilly Cooper. Author, and saying that he reads it to his kids, because he obviously doesn't actually have any interest.
Well,
in
I don't know
that.
I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't much of a cultural hinterland there. But the reason I mentioned Gordon Brown and the Arctic Monkeys is that when the media ask you about your cultural enthusiasms, as a politician, you are kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. If he'd come out and claimed that his favourite book was War and Peace, someone would be pulling it apart at the moment to demonstrate why what that really means about him is X, Y, and Z. What's your story? How do you? I mean, you were doing drama at school. Could you have pursued a creative life?
I was, I did drama at GCSE, and I was then part of an amateur drama theatre called Mid Powers Youth Theatre.
Yeah.
Absolutely adored acting. And I then did try to look going down the route into acting and so on. But I found the problem with acting, especially in this country, is that it's a very, what's the word? There's too many people in the market that want to be an actor. So you really do have to stand out. And also, if you then try to put all of your eggs into that basket, there is no support from the government, as you said, to try and give you the monetary support
unless you
that
start
need.
earning. So back in the 80s, when Julie Hesmondhalgh was coming through, you could live on income support and housing benefit while trying to make it, and you wouldn't do it indefinitely. You'd give yourself a year or two, and if it didn't happen, then you were. But under the current system, you can't do that. And if you end up on universal credit and you've got income from your creativity one month and not the next, the system is almost designed to make your survival impossible.
If the universal credit system isn't there to support people that are struggling to find normal jobs, then it's not going to be able to support people that are looking for very specialised jobs, such as being an actor in a BBC show or an actor even in like smaller indie developments and stuff like that.
Well, you make a very powerful point about what we could loosely describe as normal jobs, because the problem we're describing extends into all sorts of areas. Thank you, Jack. Take care, because Sheena's been in touch to say I'm a self-employed cleaner and single mum. They put me on the minimum income floor of 30 hours a week, even though my doctor wrote a letter that I suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome and simply couldn't work that many hours. They said a doctor's letter doesn't count, so I get £200 a month less benefits. It's not just creatives, James, it's anyone that can't work those hours that gets clobbered by this part of the scheme. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Sheena. And Paul in Red Hill next. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Lovely to talk to you.
Likewise.
Big fan.
Thank you,
I'd get that bit out of the way.
Thank you. It's not compulsory, by the way. I'm more than happy to dive straight into the phone call. You're very kind. Thank you, mate.
No, I was just mentioning to your researcher there, I remember that this system, it was called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme.
That's right. That's what the Happy Mondays used, I think.
Absolutely. And it only lasted for 12 months. And what it was, me and a friend of mine were, I've been a musician for the best part of 45 years.
Oh, yeah.
So I sound a little croaky. I had a gig last night and I had the flu for the last week.
I was going to say, sounds like you were on stage last night.
Perfect timing. But what we did, we had a duo with a guitar and various backing tracks and drum machines and stuff. And we were doing a lot of gigs, particularly around Islington and in London. And this came up. So we said, we'll go down. You had to go to a meeting. You had to sit in, fill out a ton of paperwork. And if you qualified, you got paid, I think it was £40 a week.
Right.
And on top of that, you could carry on gigging and earn that money, which we did. And it led to us getting a major management contract with a big artists management, the guy who managed Paul Young and Alison Moyer. He signed us up. That only lasted 12 months. But it also tied in, I thought, with what you said about the political and class idea of the way the arts are going. Because what happened was, the irony is it was a Thatcher government that was getting the state to encourage people to work.
Well, it got you off the jobless
skyrocketed
list
away.
as well. It got you off the jobless list as well, didn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't on it at the time.
No, but
That was the thing. I
even if
wasn't
you had been, signing up
Sure.
for the enterprise allowance scheme would have got you off it.
Absolutely, and which is what it did.
Yeah.
So and then we were able to do that, and then but I just thought it was ironic when you said, where's the state gone? The state.
Where is it
In
now?
her case,
You
not
couldn't
that I
do
was
it
ever a
now.
fan,
What would you do now?
I don't know, mate. To be honest, I'm trying. I have to work now. I'm a courier driver during the day, and I gig in the evenings, and
Sure.
it gives me some flexibility because if I do little tours and stuff, I used to do tours in France. I did them for the last 10 years, and they were fantastic. But
Flexibility.
that ain't gonna happen anymore.
Flexibility is something that the system doesn't accommodate anymore. When's your next gig, Paul? It's not some sort of death metal band, is it? You're not going to get me in trouble with your...
I'm a blues and soul man. And I'm from Wolverhampton originally, so we've got a little link Midlands-wise.
There it is.
I think that's probably why I've got an affinity with you, Jabs. Not just your political views.
What a lovely thing to say. What a lovely thank you, mate. When's your next gig? Where is it?
I've got a gig in a place called Ruislip, and it's not till June the 23rd.
All right, well, then
it's with a rock band I do called Fire and Water, which is a Led Zeppelin and Free and Bad Company tribute band, which we've been running for years, which is great fun.
There's a West Midlands connection there, then, with Led Zeppelin. Do you know my Led Zeppelin story?
Go for it.
Do you not know it?
No, I don't.
I've only got 8 stories. I recycle them on a rotational basis on this programme. But when my mum was running a dress agency in Kidderminster, she needed a model to do for the slightly older woman. So she'd do like fashion shows for cancer research, coffee mornings, and they'd sell tickets, and Mum would make her money by selling the dresses, and the charity would make the money by selling the tickets to the coffee morning. And she saw this lady walking up the road in Kidderminster, and she thought that she was a very, good-looking woman. She'd make a wonderful model for the bit. So she just pulled over the Mini. Me and my sister in the car pulled over the Mini, got out, started a conversation. She's from Yorkshire, my mum, so she can start a conversation with anyone. Became great friends with this woman, and she became a model and a good friend. And after a few months, just dropped it into the conversation that she was John Bonham's mum.
Well, I have sung with his sister.
Kate, no, what is it? Debbie Bonham, yes, of course. Another Kidderminster legend. There it is. There's a bonding over the Bonhams. Thank you, Paul. Take care, mate, and good luck at the next gig, June the 21st in Ruislip. There you go. You heard it here first. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That it is a closed shop. And this as well, Nicky says, I remember when I was young, there were actors from all different social classes, but nowadays they all seem to be from Benedict Cumberbatch's background. And then you mentioned some awful man who's now got some sort of fascist party. I don't know what you or who you mean. 12:30 is the time. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines. Here's the thing. Why does it matter? Because I've framed this conversation in a way that just presumes you understand that it does. But how would you explain to somebody else why it matters that access to a creative career is being increasingly curtailed for people who don't have independent means, independent wealth? For me, it was journalism. And I was so lucky, that the menswear shop I worked in, or the department store I worked in, the manager of menswear looked after me. He knew what it was like to try to get into. He knew I didn't want to do it forever. So when I started getting shifts on newspapers, I could ring him up the night before and tell him, and he would make arrangements that I was covered in the shop. So my student job had turned into a job, which I needed to be in London. And if I wasn't in London, there's no earthly way I would have been able to do shifts on newspapers. So if it wasn't for Bob Monday, which wasn't even his real name, but I've given you one of my classic ancient stories already today. I won't give you another one. But if it wasn't for Bob, I wouldn't have been able to be a journalist, or at least I'd have had to do something very, very differently. But I had friends, by dint of the school I went to, I had friends who had flats in Pimlico or flats in Chelsea that they could live in and not have to even pay rent. So they had a much better chance of getting into a career that involved a bit of luck, a bit of waiting around, a bit of waiting for your opportunity. If you had to go out and earn a crust, not suggesting I went down a coal mine or anything like that, but even privilege has gradations, doesn't it? So why does it matter that if you haven't got a bit of money behind you, you haven't got wealth, then these creative careers are becoming increasingly impossible to access? 03456060973. Jimmy's in Northampton. Jimmy, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
it's a really poignant thing for myself. So I'll be as brief as I can. I had a very comfortable upbringing in leafy Northamptonshire. Lived in a nice house with my grandparents and family and such. I went through the typical education system, and I basically got to a point where the only way I could pursue anything that interested me from a creative aspect was to, like you just said, then not pay rent, borrow, beg and steal. But I only had that option because of the luxury of a comfortable family setting.
Yeah.
Then, not to mention on top, people, my grandparents especially, how much do you need? A couple of grand, sure, here you go. Oh, you need a bit more, great, here you go. Oh, you want an Apple Mac? Yeah, fine, we can do that. You don't realise at the time, I didn't, how lucky you were. But what really flipped it on its head for me was I actually went back to do some guest lecturing at the local college and university shortly after I graduated. And I saw it from completely the other side, where I saw the kids that didn't have that access to funds and, time without having to do naff jobs that no one wants to do. And they had endless potential and bright young minds, and it just felt like such a waste, such a massive shame, because I don't want to sound too cynical, but it feels like they're going to struggle more than I did.
Well, it's not. It's almost as if, it may not be conscious or deliberate, although I'm not supremely confident that it isn't, that those kind of jobs aren't for the likes of those kind of kids. It's if you want to go into setting up your own business or doing something creative, then that's for our children, not your children. The Conservatives sometimes seem to be saying.
I think you're absolutely right. I would personally love to know, what, and I put myself out there to help where I can, to be a springboard of sorts, or any help for the I say call them kids, young adults.
Sure. Sorry, my bad.
No, not at all. That have got aspirations. And another sort of sideline point, all my sort of colleagues and freelancers that we work closely with together, all, I think without fail, have had a very similar background to myself.
Yeah.
I can't think off the top of my head.
Well, it's choices. I always say this. Money doesn't buy you happiness, but it buys you choices. It buys you doors. There's more doors in front of you when you leave school or you leave college than there were in front of other people. There are more doors in front of me. Loads more doors. And some of them you might not be able to open. Some of us rush through the first one that does open, but it's the number of doors that you have the choice to go through. Some people just have one. Some people have none, in a way. And it matters because, it's what is it? What does it do to a population? The creativity of parts of it. It's if it was a house, that would be the playroom, wouldn't it? Or if it was a house, that would be the lounge. That would be the heart of the house. And fewer and fewer people are able to access it. Feels deliberate to me. I'm happy to be wrong. Lucas is in Lewisham. Lucas, what would you like to say?
Hey, it's really nice to speak to you. You've made a very positive contribution to my life and the understanding of it.
What a lovely thing to say. Thank you, Lucas.
Yeah. Oh, no, thank you. Basically, so I'm a lawyer. It's okay, but what I really wanted to do was to be a drummer in a band. That's what I really wanted to do. That was my solace. That was my passion growing up.
Yes.
To check my privilege at the door, I went to posh school. I was on a full scholarship, so while I had access to opportunity, I didn't have the kind of independent family wealth that my peers at school had.
Sure.
Essentially, at university, my band and I worked very hard. We did a lot of, extra hours, put our time in, and we got a record deal, and it was lovely. But when you took away the money that was required by the label, we each got about $3,000 a year to live on.
How much?
So
the phone line went.
$3,000 to $4,000
Gosh.
a year.
Yes.
So when you took two of the members who had independent wealth and their parents were kind and helped them sustain that lifestyle living in central London, where the gigs are, I suppose, and two of us had to get shift work, and the band collapsed as a result.
Under the weight of the finance. Now that's incredible. So a band, half of it or 3/5 of it privately educated. And yet you couldn't sustain it in the way that Sean Ryder could when he set up the Happy Mondays in the 80s in Manchester.
No, there was maybe it was ignorance on our behalf, but we did a lot of research. You couldn't find the options.
No, it wasn't ignorance on your behalf. It literally, you could do it then. You could get this enterprise allowance scheme, or you could live on income support. There were just all sorts of things going on.
The other person I think worth mentioning, my girlfriend is from Canada. She's lived here for 12 years. She's an actor, and she regularly earns sort of below or around the income tax threshold.
Yes.
And she's by a very kind friend who lets her live at essentially not for free but very low rent. I help her where I can. She makes an immensely positive contribution to her community. She set up a local theatre which aims to get more black people involved in theatre in Streatham, in her local area. She volunteers weekly at a homeless support shelter, and she was treated with suspicion and a degree of hostility for a while by Theresa May's Home Office. She probably got through on the fact that she's a blonde white woman and from
but her financial contribution to the country was the only thing being measured, as opposed to her, for one, I mean, the word is cultural, her cultural contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of us sort of try our best to get by in this world. We're a happy couple, but it kind of cognitive dissonance I live with, being told you're doing a great job, you're doing a great career, you should be happy. Yeah, it's okay, but you don't wake up in the morning going, I can't wait to do some data protection analysis
do
today.
Some lawyering. Well, I hope you do. I hope it gets more exciting as time passes. But how much would you have given yourself, realistically? How much time would you have given yourself before you called time on the dream in your own volition, of your own volition?
5 years of working part-time at Sky Sports and the England Cricket Board, trying to find other bands or play in other bands. Because really all you want to do is drum.
I love it. Lucas, mate, thank you. Thank you as well for coming at it from an angle more similar perhaps to mine, because as I said before you came on, if it wasn't for the manager of the menswear department I was working in, I don't know what quite would have happened to us. 12:41, a couple of people wondering whether that caller earlier was Paul Cox, who... There you go. Hi, James. Was that Paul Cox who just rang in? He's a great vocalist. If it was him, it certainly sounded like him. Yes, it was actually Paul Cox. I've checked. Well, unless there are two blues and soul singers who were born in Wolverhampton in 1959, because in terms of age, there it is. Graham's in Liverpool. Graham, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you today?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. No, I've been told by a bunch of people that I have to call in on this because it's one of my little bugbears that it really does feel to someone who went to a state school that the arts, the politics in this country is absolutely dominated by people coming from money. Yes. Or at least coming from private education. If you go to the website privateschoolmafia.com, there is a list of 581 people in the public eye.
I hope I'm on it.
Household names, you're on it, yeah.
Fantastic.
Along with a lot of people called Jeremy, a surprising number of people called Jeremy. But this is my experience. So I went to a really good school in Liverpool. It was a state school. But we only had one lad in our year. There were 100 lads in our year, and we only had one that got into Oxford. And I thought that was very telling when you've got people like Toby Young, whose daddy can call up and say, hey, Toby didn't get the grades to get into Oxford. Would you mind sorting it out?
I believe that's happened. Don't forget, not everybody listening is going to have a clue who or what you're talking about. So just steer me. How old are you, Graham?
I'm 44. I don't have any kids of my own, and I don't own a house.
Do you think it is? Hang on, just wait, because we're going to run out of time. I'm keen to pick your brains. Do you think it's better or worse now than it was when you left school for people from your? It is a lot
worse. It is a lot worse. When you look at people like the Zootons or the Arctic Monkeys, they had the New Deal for musicians, so they could potentially claim dole while they were still working as jobbing musicians, getting off the ground. Nowadays, everything to do with the music, to do with acting, to do with politics. It is absolutely dominated by people coming from money. And I believe that Brexit, one of the big driving factors for the ruling class backing it, was to ensure that their kids get to hog all the top jobs for another generation. I think it's way worse now than it ever was.
Far be it from me to accuse someone of shoehorning Brexit into every single conversation. But I haven't heard that before. So the reason why they would be in favour of the abolition of freedom of movement is to reduce the candidate pool for the plum jobs in well-rewarded... Well, we'll never know for sure.
Try being a musician now. Try being a musician. You've got to have an album completely done to give to the record company and say, there you go, there's my album.
And what do you live on?
If you don't have money, you're not going to be able to do that, and you're not going to be able to tour in Europe like you used to be for free. You've now got to pay for visas to be able to go and do that.
Right,
so that's been shut off.
And you can't do a proper tour because you can only do the whatever it is, the 60 days out, the 30 days out, whatever.
Exactly.
What would help? What would improve? Because it's what's dispiriting.
The abolition of private schools.
Well, we can't do that overnight. And in fact, there's no political party wants to do that. But access,
because you don't. On the PTA of the local school would really help, James.
I'm sure.
Local school raising money and stuff.
Yeah, hang on, because I wanted to push you in a slightly different direction. Because the fact that things have got worse over the course of your adulthood, when of course private schools existed when you left school as well. In terms of policy to reverse some of that decline, what would that policy look like? It would have to come from from the welfare state.
I'm a big supporter. I'm a big supporter of universal basic income.
Yeah,
Let people have enough money to live on, and then they can pursue those dreams for as long as it takes them to make it. Because you look at like YouTubers, for instance, even starting on YouTube, you see these people making millions on YouTube, but you've got to, even with that, you've got to have money or a lot of luck to get going to the point where you're earning that kind of money. It is really like all or nothing with those platforms.
Yeah, I tell you what, the old line about being born 3-0 up and thinking you've scored a hat-trick is getting more resonant. It gets more resonant every year. I shall have a look at your website, Graham, and I shall make some suggestions of people you might have missed out, because oddly enough, and in fact, we should go back to but we won't be able to find it now, but the piece I did for the Spectator 20-odd years ago, which sort of zoned in entirely, with obviously full disclosure about my own public school privilege, zoned in entirely on the point that you raise. And oddly, I would have thought at the time things were about to get better, not worse, particularly because of New Labour and Cool Britannia and all that malarkey. But as Graham attests quite accurately, things are considerably worse now than they were then. Harge points out that UB40 was even named after one of the unemployment benefits forms, which presumably some of the band members were on. And you're right, Harge, they are from my neck of the woods. I've got a UB40 story as well, but it's nowhere near as good as my John Bonham story, so I'll probably save it for another day. 10 to 1, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sangeeta, as you just heard, in for Sheila. If you haven't caught Sangeeta's show before, you're in for a lovely, lovely treat. So make sure you stay tuned after that. I love sliding door moments. I had one the other day. I had one on Wednesday. I was just walking through Islington, and there was a Hall of Residence, a London School of Economics Hall of Residence in Islington that I wasn't in. A few of my mates were. I was in one down by Tower Bridge. And just that little thing, just thinking, gosh, I wonder how different my life would have been if I'd been in that hall of residence in my first year. Everything would have been different. I think Martin Lewis was in it, actually, the money-saving expert. Just little things like that. Joy's had one just now listening to this. She says, James, this is a brilliant topic. When I left school, I really wanted to go to art college, but my funding fell through and I had no choice but to go to work in a bank until I could reapply the following year. I never left. Turned out well. I moved into investment management and I'm now a very high earner. But your phone-in has reminded me of that art school dream, sliding door moment. I do wonder what would have happened if I had gone to art college. And she adds, I'm lucky to be 51 and worked at a time when banks took on school leavers routinely. I'm not sure kids with dreams from my deprived background would even have that option today. 12:51 is the time. This week's Full Disclosure is with Alistair Campbell. This is quite interesting. Make a list now of people who have got a significant size platform in this country that they use to routinely criticise, I would say right-wing media, first of all, and the government. Just make a list of people. Because I could only come up with 3. And those 3 were Carol Vorderman, Gary Lineker, and Alistair Campbell. I know there are more. Owen Jones at The Guardian has a decent-sized platform, but there's a lot, and this isn't a criticism, but he dedicates a lot of his time to critiquing Keir Starmer, as well as the government. I think some people on the left dedicate all of their time to critiquing Keir Starmer and so-called centrists, but Owen isn't one of them. But people with a really big platform in Britain, who are tireless critics of the right-wing media and the right-wing government, dedicated critics of it. I can't even think of 5. I've got those 3. You might stick me on the list if you want. That would make 4. Isn't that mad? They're now writing endlessly about the liberal elite that's in charge, or the woke blob that controls everything. That's why it's always interesting to sit down with Alistair Campbell and to talk to him, which I have done on a few occasions, this being one of my favourites, if not the favourite, because we cover an awful lot of ground. And the reason for the interview is his new book, What Can I Do? Because he spends an awful lot of time being asked by people, perhaps frustrated by the fact that they can only think of 3 individuals who have a decent-sized platform and routinely critique right-wing media and government. All of it. Actually, Gary hasn't done Full Disclosure, has he? He did my last podcast when I was doing it for someone. We should get him on, shouldn't we, soon? Frustrated by the status quo, come up to Alistair Campbell and ask him what can they do? What can they actually do in order to make a change or make a difference? So he's written a whole book telling them, and that was part of the subject of the conversation that we had for Full Disclosure. But here's a little taster for you. When did ambition kick in? So it just strike me as well, the book that we're going to talk about, But What Can I Do? You've already sort of touched on the central theme there, is that when you were a news journalist, you didn't feel, and this is a call to answer other people, but viewed through the lens of what you know and what you've done, that idea of being a news journalist not being enough. I'm not doing enough, particularly as the...
Yeah. I still feel that now, by the way. That's a relentless thing in my life. I've always felt I'm not doing enough.
As in to redress the balance, to fight the good fight.
Yeah, to sort of change the world. And I address in the book, I write a piece about... Because the book, But What Can I Do? I've given it that title because that's what people ask me the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get the same. You know, I agree with what you rant about. I agree with what you say. I agree with what you write. But what can I do? I want to change the world as well. And I address head on the sort of central hole, if you like, that I assess in my argument about why I should be the person writing this book, which is that, well, you could do a lot more. You could become an MP. You could decide to... And I explain why I haven't done that. And it's kind of complicated and it's quite personal and psychological and all that, but I explain why I haven't done that. But the point is that we can all do stuff, and I don't feel I do enough. And often people, you know, like recently I was doing this thing and I was given this award for mental health campaigning and all this sort of stuff, and I don't know why, there's something in me that whenever I get something like that, I feel slightly that I didn't deserve it because I haven't done enough. I don't know if that resonates with you, that you never quite feel you've done enough.
Not in the context of everything. Maybe I mean, if you look at the state we're in now and you think you've got any form of platform or voice, the fact that things are so bad means you haven't done enough. And there's no getting it. So I have it on that level, but not on an existential level.
I'll tell you how bad I get it sometimes. I will be having a sleepless night.
Yeah.
And I'll be lying in bed, can't sleep, giving up on, you know, that time when you get and you just think, oh, it's pointless. So I'm lying there and I'm thinking, do you know what, when Gordon asked me 2 years before the election to go back and help him, I went back eventually for the last few months, right, but I wonder if I'd have gone back, would that have made a difference? And I wonder if Gordon had won. I have the same thing about not doing enough for David Miliband to become leader of the Labour Party. If I'd have helped David more, would he have become Labour leader? If he'd have become Labour leader, would that have stopped David Cameron becoming Prime Minister? Would that mean we wouldn't have the Brexit referendum? If we didn't have the Brexit referendum, we wouldn't have had Trump as president.
I can see why you're not going back to sleep.
If we didn't have Trump as president, the world wouldn't be coming to an end. And I think, it's all your fault, you lazy No wonder you can't sleep.
That's two swears from Campbell and one from Mateless on the programme today. You can tell that we have been conscientious with the bleep button. If you listen to the original podcasts, whether it's Emily Mateless's Newsagents podcast with John, of course, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall, or whether it is my Full Disclosure podcast with Alistair Campbell, you can hear the swearing. It's uncensored, right? It's uncensored. You can hear Emily Mateless use the F word on the Newsagents podcast from earlier in this week when the slightly ridiculous Guito Harry was the subject of that interview. That's almost it from me for today. I think I shall squeeze in one more call if I can. And it is Anthony in Hastings has that honour. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Love the show. Love your monologues.
Stop it. Stop it. Honestly, stop it already. Seriously, we haven't got long.
First time caller, a bit nervous, but I've got something to say about the underfunding of the arts, and it's kind of linked into what you were saying just now. that the breeding ground of left-wing opinion, shall I say,
yes,
is often in the arts. And
yes.
So whilst people, whilst they might enjoy going to see the opera or the theatre, they're a bit tentative about putting lots of money into it because it shines a light and holds a mirror up to what's going on in society.
Yes.
And so that's, I think, where the central funding problem comes. They don't see or they don't accept that the arts contributes huge amount of money to the UK economy. Something like, is it for every £1 invested, multiple pounds comes back into the economy. So it's a completely false illusion.
Yes, it is, isn't it? It's a weird one. So the motivation must be something rather more sinister. I mean, some art needs subsidy, some art doesn't make a lot of money, but the money will be made in other areas, wouldn't it? It'll be going on the sidelines, as it were. I'm out of time, so you've got one more sentence. Don't spoil it.
Okay. It's a sad but accepted truth that arts relies on private philanthropy, and whilst we're very grateful for that, the government should actually view the arts as what it really is an extremely valuable part of the UK economy.
You're right. I mean, charity again, isn't it? Thank you, Anthony. Sorry to curtail you, cut you off in your prime on your debut. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can, of course, also rewind live radio. You'll also find all LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the very best video clips from LBC and other global stations. That's Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Now it's time for Sangeeta Maiska. 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 For Sangeeta Maiska.